when you've done
Okay.
something. It takes a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
Hold on. Let's start the chat
Thank you. I call to order the Manassas Park Governing Body Town Hall for September 29th, 2020. First, although this is a town hall, the governing body is still gathered as a body, so per recommendation of City Attorney, we will have the following statement as usual. For the General Assembly's approval of the governor's amendments to the biennial budget, the governing body may now meet electronically without a quorum actually assembled in a single location and without the in-person governing body members voting on the participation of those who are remoting in. The following benchmarks for the meeting this evening have been met. First, the governor has declared a state of emergency for the current COVID-19 pandemic in accordance with Code of Virginia. Second, the declared emergency makes it impractical or potentially unsafe for the governing body to assemble in a single location, and guidance from state and federal government support this determination. Therefore, the governing body will be meeting with various members participating electronically through GoToMeeting. Third, the meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the governing body. Fourth, the governing body will make available a recording or transcript of the meeting on its website in accordance with Code of Virginia. Fifth, notice has been and will continue to be provided to the public using available methods. Lastly, we have made and will continue to make arrangements for public access through electronic means, including the ability to comment. Those participating electronically are Councilmember Miriam Machado, Councilmember Hector Sendejas, Councilmember Hasib Javed, and Vice Mayor Banks. Those participating in person are Councilmember Donald Shoemaker, Councilmember Alana Mensing, and Mayor Jeanette Rischel. And I also want to extend our thanks and our appreciation for all the work and the effort that staff went through to put on and get ready for this town hall. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to you, Laszlo.
Okay. Okay, so just to let you know, Madam Mayor, we do have Councilman Sendejas, Councilman Javed, Councilwoman Machado, and Vice Mayor Banks. Are you there yet? So I don't see his name on there. I don't think we have Vice Mayor Banks, but
Okay.
if he jumps on, we'll let
Okay,
you know
thank you.
of that. And then good evening, everyone watching from home. On the call with us from a city staff perspective, we do have the police department, Chief Lugo and Deputy Chief Reinhardt. From the community development department, we do have Director Calvin Odell, our zoning administrator slash development services manager, Michelle Berry, and then our code enforcement officer, Denora Castillo, with us as well. And then of course our internal team here. I am the city manager, Lazo Palco. If anyone was tuning in to the few downtown town halls that we did last year, a few in person and then one virtually, same speaker from that presentation. Tonight we're going over parking and community maintenance issues. So, give us 1 second. Okay, so the purpose of tonight's meeting, during the virtual town hall that we did for the downtown, we were getting a lot of questions related to community maintenance and parking issues, generic, so not really focused on the downtown itself. So we discussed the idea of doing a future virtual town hall or post-COVID-19 in-person town hall to discuss those issues, because we seem to be getting a lot of questions, not just at the virtual town hall, but also via social media. So what we want to do tonight is let our two lead departments who deal with these issues, our police department and our community development department, to actually present a few components of what's involved with the program, what the challenges are, and then what some potential options are. And I'll actually summarize those options for our governing body. We have roughly 12 of them towards the end of this presentation. We'll then open up a Q&A sheet from a list of questions that we were getting from residents and from members of the governing body. We posted all of those on our website, on the main page of our website. You'll be able to see that along with this presentation as well if you want to follow up after this meeting and relook at our slides and look at the answers also for the Q&A. We'll then also open it up to any remaining questions from the public and from the governing body, and it'll really be the discretion of the governing body after this presentation of how we want to kind of manage the Q&A process. But we will be here to answer any questions. And we'll also provide a link at the end of this for a survey that we are going to publish that we will want our residents to fill out that will really touch on these issues that we discussed tonight, and really trying to get an understanding of how much of an issue this is, how much of a priority it is also, because there's a lot of issues facing the city, and we have to prioritize what it is that we're really going to focus on. There's a lot of goals, and some of them competing goals, that we need to accomplish, which is why we've been so focused on financial management and economic growth to be able to accomplish a lot of those goals. So we will have that survey available, and we will encourage as many residents as possible to fill that out to give us an idea of how pressing an issue this is. Just to note, if we're unable to answer any question tonight because we need more time to research it, we, just like at the last virtual town hall, we will end up publishing something on our website and our social media responding to those questions that were unanswered this evening as well. So, Chief Lugo, I will turn it over to you for the police department's section.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council, city staff, and citizens. My name is Mario Lugo. I'm the Chief of Police with the City of Manassas Park. With me today is Major Reinhardt. Next slide, please. One more. The police department handles all the enforcement and parking complaints and violations for the City of Manassas Park, to include the monitoring and enforcement of state and local laws pertaining to on-street and off-street public parking, and investigates all parking complaints that come to the department. Some of the most common complaints that we receive are no city decal, commercial vehicles, out-of-state vehicles, which non-resident vehicles, expired and state inspections and registrations, in and operative vehicles. Our enforcement, we have been very proactive. This year so far, or in FY20, we were up to 46% in our enforcement of parking violations. Next slide, please.
Give us 1 second, Chief. We're having some technical issues here.
No worries, sir.
So we are on GoToMeeting now also, Chief, so you can see it that way as well in real time.
We switch over to GoToMeeting.
Did he say 46% increase? In
Ours just rolls up too.
Oh, you'll see it right here. Yeah, you can see the first bullet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just didn't advance to the right page.
And
Sorry about that.
You guys ready? I'm sorry.
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'm sorry. In FY20, our officers issued almost 3,400 parking citations in the city. Out of those 3,400, 616 were for expired state inspections, roughly 1,000 for no city decal, 516 for no valid state tag displayed, 48 for obstructing a sidewalk or driveway, 11 for commercial vehicles parking on city roads, and 58 for parking within 15 feet of a fire hydrant. Next slide, please. In FY21, so far, our officers have issued 845 tickets, 411 for no city decal, 221 expired state inspections, 61 no valid state tag displayed, and 9 for obstructing a sidewalk or driveway. As you can see, pinpointing on the map, it shows that this is throughout the whole city enforcement.
So note that, again, this is just for the first 2 months of the fiscal year, July and August.
Oh, wow.
Yes, sir.
So we're much further ahead than we were last year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're looking doubling from last year as well.
Wow.
Next slide, please. Our officers respond to over 26,000 calls for service annually, which does not include the proactive of traffic and parking enforcement at times. Our agency also operates with the lowest per capita level at 26% under the regional average, which says a lot for us to be able to write that many citations in FY21 and especially in FY20. Officers encounter numerous violations that we discussed in the previous slide that outside jurisdiction. The challenges we kind of face with that is having the vehicle here for more than 30 days and having our officers work overlapping 12-hour shifts creates some challenges for them to monitor the vehicles that are here parked in the city for more than 30 days, especially for non-resident vehicles.
Yeah, before we go to the next slide, the important point also, our police and our staff, there are property rights, so we can't just go to people's backyards and investigate violations. There's a due process, and so you can see that bolded bullet there in the third bullet where for the decal violations, it's difficult for our police to enforce that on private property unless it's clearly observable from the road, sidewalk, or the walkway to the house as well. And that's going to be kind of a theme throughout most code enforcement items as well. One of the primary challenges we face with parking is not having a dedicated parking enforcement unit. This actually hurts us in terms of trying to monitor out-of-state tags or out-of-jurisdiction tags. Obviously, our neighboring jurisdictions like Falls Church and Fairfax, they do have, which are comparable to our city, have parking enforcement officers, and they each have two. And of course, we don't have any. Our officers have to share those duties. Next slide, please. Okay. We'll discuss some of these legislative options in more detail in the kind of summary slide, but we're just throwing out some ideas here for what can help out, but we'll go over those in more detail at a later slide.
These are some of the questions that we received was, how long does somebody have to register a vehicle with City of Manassas Park, and that is 30 days with the DMV. And also 30 days to obtain a city decal from the Commissioner of Revenue. Another one that I'm not sure if the citizens are aware that if a vehicle is garage, stored, or parked within city limits for more than 30 days, they have to have a city decal. Or I'm not correct, they need to have the vehicle registered within the City of Manassas Park and have a city decal. Another question we get, can I place cones or objects in front of my house to save my parking space in front of my house? Unfortunately, no. Our city ordinance does not allow that. No person shall obstruct or place any obstruction, structure, or foreign matter or material to temporarily or permanently upon a street, sidewalk within the city. Next slide, please. Our city does not allow people to block sidewalks and driveways. It's under City Ordinance 24-53. No person shall park in front of anybody's private driveway within 15 feet of a fire hydrant, painted yellow curb, blocking a mailbox, or a designated fire hydrant. We also receiving a lot of complaints on Manassas Drive for speeding. When we looked at that, I'm not sure where these complaints are originating from or where they're being reported at, but we have no record of them being reported to the police department. But last year alone, we issued 360 speeding citations along Manassas Drive across the city, and that was between January and September. And unless I got some questions, that's all I have.
Great. Okay, Calvin, we're going to move on to you now. Please wait 15 seconds here for the slides to update for your department on YouTube.
Calvin O'Dell. I'm the Director of Community Development for the City of Manassas Park. As far as community maintenance, property code enforcement, we handle zoning violations. As far as community maintenance, property code enforcement.
Calvin, if you have your computer on, can you mute your computer speakers and mic?
Yeah,
Hold
okay, my computer speakers are muted.
on. Okay. I think that did the trick. Thanks. Go ahead.
Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we're good now.
Okay, as far as Department of Community Development for community maintenance and enforcement, we handle property code violations. We handle zoning violations and certain miscellaneous code provisions, primarily under Chapter 17 of the City Code. Property code violations are observations and investigations on private property where the owner is the de facto responsible party for things occurring on their property. The ownership of the violation can almost always be resolved by boundary plats that show locations of structures to the property line, so that we can determine where exactly the violation lies in relationship to the owned property lines. The goal is always compliance, not prosecution. What we want is nice-looking neighborhoods and nice-looking lots. We don't want to charge people criminally, which is where most of the violations lead. Nice-looking neighborhoods and nice-looking lots. We don't want to charge people criminally. Next slide.
If I can ask everyone at home, besides Calvin, to mute your mics, please. We're getting feedback. Thank you.
Okay, as far as zoning, Chapter 31 of the City Code covers all matters zoning, with the exceptions of the subdivision ordinance. But as far as basic zoning restrictions and permissions, those are all in Chapter 31 of the City Code. When it comes to private property, we don't really regulate the publicly owned areas, the right-of-ways. Outdoor storage is a major issue in the city. It's one of our more common violations. That is when people store domestic goods in plain sight on their property. Domestic storage is only properly accomplished in accordance with our zoning code inside of the main and accessory structure. Parking in the grass in the front yard, that's another common violation. Oftentimes people can't find places to park on the street, so they begin parking in the grassy areas of the front yard, but that's strictly prohibited in the zoning code. More than one family living in a dwelling unit, we get many complaints that are called overcrowding complaints. The way the zoning code approaches that is it says that the residential zones are single family residential zones unless they're specifically designated as multiple family residential zones. When you have a single family residential zone, only one family is allowed to occupy the dwelling unit, and then we further define family as a group of 4 or more people living together as a family unit, or as anyone living together related by blood or marriage. Another common issue is inoperable vehicles on private property. When a vehicle is not displaying a valid state license plate, or is not displaying an up-to-date inspection sticker, or is noticeably in disrepair beyond operation, that fits the definition of inoperable vehicle. The other major area of enforcement is the Property Maintenance Code. The Virginia Property Maintenance Code is actually Part 3 of the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code. We adopt that maintenance standard in Chapter 7 of the City Code. So Part 3 of the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code becomes the standard of maintenance of structures in the city of Manassas Park. Structures in disrepair or in need of maintenance can include all sorts of things that are individually listed by the state of Virginia, including roofs, gutters, siding, windows, anything that's in disrepair and can clearly be noted to be in a state of disrepair. Can also include required systems not performing their intended function. So if we have proof that a roof is leaking, or that the plumbing is not functioning, that a piece of equipment, a water heater, or say a required heating system, if they're not functioning as intended, that's also a violation of the maintenance code. There are plenty of miscellaneous violations that fall upon property code enforcement to handle. That is where you'll find your tall grass and weeds, any grass and weeds in the city in excess of 10 inches. That's a miscellaneous code violation. Vegetation, trees and shrubs that encroach upon the sidewalk or street, any public right-of-way encroachment by overgrown vegetation. There are animals that are prohibited. Anything that fits the definition of livestock is a prohibited animal, and we define livestock. There's common things like chickens, bunnies, things like that that can't be kept in the city. And the public health nuisances, there can be many things that fall in the category of a public health nuisance. Things like water standing in pots and tires that are breeding mosquitoes, things that noxious odors caused by certain chemicals being stored. There's all sorts of public health nuisances that are covered in the nuisance ordinance. Grass and weeds, we get that complaint quite often, especially in the summertime. It's often associated with vacant properties. Properties often wind up in a state of transition where either a real estate company is expected to manage it temporarily while it's for sale, or it's in between renters and the owner is neglecting the property. But we often find that our repeat offenders are usually vacant properties. 10 inches is usually far taller than most neighbors consider acceptable. Most people cut their grass when it gets to 6 or 8 inches, so by the time it's 10 inches, usually the neighbors are already pretty upset, but that's just the beginning of our process. And it's also the easiest violation to repeat because until late October, the grass does not stop growing. So if you handle the situation once, get cooperation on compliance from the owner or the person in charge of the property, you may get compliance once in a year, and then the violation may repeat and you start the process all over again. Inoperable vehicles, it often requires access to property beyond what's called the path of the mailman. The path of the mailman is the path that reasonably anyone would have to take to knock on your front door or place a package for delivery. As code enforcement, property code enforcement inspectors, we don't go beyond that path. We have an implied right to take that path, and we can only really venture onto your property on that path. So as long as we can see it from the path of the mailman, then we can cite the violation. But oftentimes inoperable vehicles wind up in fenced-in backyards or obscured by vegetation in the backyard, and we don't have a right to go wandering onto private property. So without some cooperation or some ability to view the vehicle and glean enough evidence to prove that it's inoperable, it can be very difficult to prove. So that poses a bit of a challenge for the inoperable vehicles. Lack of maintenance of structures. The property maintenance code doesn't always regulate aesthetics. In some cases, when it comes to siding and paint, and roofs that are obviously so dilapidated they must be leaking, yeah, you can say that regulates aesthetics, but the code doesn't specifically speak to aesthetics or appearance. It's really a matter of keeping the exterior watertight, and the siding and the paint and the roofing in performing their intended function. So it's really an issue of disrepair. Many potential violations require access to the inside to prove. I spoke before about how there are violations related to plumbing not functioning, certain equipment inside the dwelling not performing its intended function. In that case, that would require cooperation of either the owners or the tenants to enter inside of the dwelling and actually prove that there are violations inside the home. It often originates and or ends with landlord-tenant disputes. We get a lot of calls from people that are in some disagreement with their landlord, and they want us to come out and inspect so that they can prove a case in court or so that they can have a valid argument with their landlord. So oftentimes when we get the kind of access we need to really start an enforcement action, we're getting tangled up in landlord-tenant disputes, which is another level of complication to the situation. When it comes to overcrowding, we found that to be by far the most difficult to prove. Yes, we have a right to knock on your door. Yes, we have a right to state that we have a complaint that we are investigating, but without some cooperation from the people living inside to either admit that they're not related or to state that there are more than 4 unrelated people inside the home, or that there's more than one family inside the home, it can be very difficult to prove. It almost always requires cooperation. And, the middle bullet there, too many people is a relative term. When it comes to property maintenance overcrowding, the property maintenance code only requires 50 square feet per person for sleeping areas. So large homes, 3,500 square feet and larger, you can often prove that 15 to 20 people can safely occupy a home under the property maintenance code. So it almost always defaults to being a zoning violation where you're trying to prove that there's more than one family or more than 4 unrelated people living together. So it can require access and cooperation. It can be very difficult to prove at times. Next slide. Inoperable vehicles, again, they have to be in visible disrepair. There has to be enough wrong with them till obviously the code enforcement inspector can say this vehicle couldn't possibly make it down the street. Other than that, if they're not displaying a valid license and an up-to-date state inspection, that does not include a city sticker, but as long as they are not displaying valid license and current state inspection, then we can see that, we can declare them inoperable. Automobile graveyards are sort of the extreme of inoperable vehicles. When we can see 5 or more inoperable vehicles on a property, at that point you're operating what's called an automobile graveyard, which falls into the definition of a junkyard. And junkyards are not permitted anywhere in the city, not even in the industrial zones. Parking vehicles in the front yard is prohibited in any residential zone in the city. So there's nowhere in the city where a car should be parked in the grassy areas of the front yard, only on the driveways. Next slide. This is a look into our most common complaints. And again, these are complaints that were required investigation. Not all of these complaints came to fruition and became cases, but these are the complaints that we're asked to investigate. Improper domestic storage, I spoke to earlier, where you're storing household goods, domestic goods, outside of the main dwelling or outside of an accessory structure, so anywhere that they're not in a building and visible to the public. That's what we call improper domestic storage, and that's a Chapter 31 zoning code violation. We had 113 complaints of those in FY19. And only 72 of those in FY20. I think you'll notice from this chart that there was a bit of slowdown in the complaints coming in during the COVID crisis. These numbers are usually pretty steady year to year, but with the lack of presence in City Hall, we weren't getting as many people at the window. So a lot of these complaints arise as people are pulling permits, inquiring about permits, and then they just want to stop and talk to us about their neighbors. So without that presence in City Hall, without that window that people are regularly at, we did see a drop in complaints from FY19 to FY20. Grass and weeds is the #2 most common complaint, and you can see that there's consistency between FY19 and FY20 in the order of the common complaints. So these figures are pretty telling as to what is your most, how you order your most common violations. 79 of those in FY19 and only 46 in 20. Inoperable vehicles would be our 3rd most common complaint, and then structure and disrepair 4th, with everything rounding out in the top 5 with the cars in the front yards. But as you can see, I listed every type of violation that we had in FY19 and FY20, every complaint we were asked to investigate, and they all fall into these general categories. Next slide.
If you can wait.
From an enforcement procedure perspective, step one is always, we receive the complaint. We do some proactive enforcement. The code enforcement officer, when they're out investigating complaints, of course, if they see something on their way out to investigate a complaint, they'll start a case, knock on a door, leave a door hanger, leave a business card, and they'll start a violation. But primarily we operate on a complaint basis because we're only operating with one code enforcement inspector. The code enforcement officer has to first go out after the complaint and verify that there's a violation. As I showed you in the slide before, that's the number of complaints we receive. That's not necessarily a number of active enforcement actions that we've taken. The first contact is always friendly and informational. A lot of people, I know from doing the job myself, just have no idea that what they're doing is actually a violation of any sort of code. So a lot of the approach is just to educate the public on what the codes are and why what they're doing is in violation of the code. 9 times out of 10, just that basic education and the embarrassment that people have from actually violating an ordinance they didn't know existed is enough to compel them to comply. And then probably, 10% of the time, it's just someone that does not want to correct or is offended by the fact that you're asking them to correct. So at that time, you have to move on. But we always try to just start with a verbal agreement on a compliance date. When will you have this fixed by? Step 2, we have to go out and reinspect and make sure that the violation has actually been corrected in accordance with the promises made. If there's no progress at that point, we have to send a written notice violation. That is really the start of the legal process. From the moment we issue that written notice of violation, the clock starts ticking. We have to assign a correction period and an appeal period. For logical reasons, the correction period should be as long or longer than the appeal period. You don't want to set a correction period shorter than the appeal period. Most of the zoning violations require at least 30 days to appeal. So it doesn't make sense for a zoning violation to set a correction date of 10 days when they have 30 days to appeal the action. Some of the miscellaneous violations, such as tall grass and weeds, those have a 10-day period for further action by the city, so you can set a shorter correction period on violations like that. With property maintenance violations, it's only a 14-day appeal period, but then you're talking about violations that can often take huge investments to correct. The roof is not a cheap thing to fix. New siding is not a cheap thing to fix. To ask someone to fix a roof or put new siding on their house in a week when you're talking about thousands of dollars is pretty unreasonable. So 14 days would be the minimum because that's the appeal period, but oftentimes those violations have 60 to 90-day correction periods because people have to arrange financing and arrange to have the work done. You cannot pursue a violation until the appeal period is over. So if the appeal period stated in the notice passes and they have not appealed the violation, then the violation is considered, 100% unappealable at that point. You had your chance to appeal. You didn't file an appeal. Now we can start pursuing further action against you for failure to correct. If the violation still exists and we go out to reinspect and the appeal period is passed, the correction period is passed, then we can go to the magistrate and issue a summons. Sometimes it's a civil violation and we are actually attempting to have the judge issue a civil penalty, a fine. Sometimes in the case of zoning violations, it is a misdemeanor offense. So you go to court and the result could be a criminal conviction, could be a correction order by the judge giving the defendant more time to correct it with further court in the future, or they could rule in favor of the defendant. In the case when they rule in the favor of the defendant, essentially they're saying that the judge doesn't necessarily agree with the interpretation or with the fact that there's actually a violation that needs to be corrected. No matter what happens in court, we still have to continue to monitor to see if the owner makes progress, because if the judge rules in a criminal conviction, that doesn't fix the violation. If the judge issues a civil penalty, that doesn't fix the violation. the judge is going to tell the defendant more than likely that they need to fix the problem. So that requires code enforcement to continue to supervise the property to see if the owner is actually going to make progress towards compliance. Depending on the nature of the violation, we may be able to declare a public nuisance, even if the court is not in favor of giving a correction order or pushing the defendant to correct the issue quickly enough. We may be able to declare a public nuisance and say that that person's violations are so egregious that they're actually a nuisance. And then we have other options where we can take action to clean the property up. But at that point, you're really getting into some gray area with how and when we're allowed to enter onto property and take action. But we're more than likely to wind up back in court for further conviction or judgment. If the defendant is really not willing to clean up their act after they've been fined by a judge or after they've been convicted criminally, we can always take them back to court because you can only get so many misdemeanors for the same thing before you're in real trouble. And people don't like paying fines. So if the judge is really willing to continue to issue fines, then that's one way that eventually you're probably going to get correction on the action. Next slide.
Hold 5 seconds, Calvin, after I switch.
We have some major challenges. We do have limited staffing. We have been for years operating with one code enforcement officer. There are over 3,800, could say residences or premises. We're not looking at the individual apartment units. There are a lot of apartments in one place, and the code enforcement inspector can drive the entire complex in a matter of minutes. But around 3,800 residents that are separate and can be patrolled separately on a population of over 17,000 people in the city. So for one code enforcement officer to try to keep up with 3,800 properties and 17,000 plus citizens can be very taxing. Proof is always a major challenge in code enforcement. Code enforcement officers need definitive proof before they start the written process because it can always wind up in court. And the city can't just pretend that violations exist. So definitive proof is always going to be required for the case to come to fruition. Court is another major challenge, a question mark, because judges can often take the stance that a person has a right to enjoy their property. So the courts can be rather sympathetic to property owners, and they may not agree with the neighbors that something is really egregious and that something really needs to be corrected. They may not agree with the language in our code or the way our code is written, or they think our code could be written better. So there's always a question mark when you go to court. What is that particular judge going to feel about the case you started? What are they going to think about the pictures you show them? What are they going to think about the interactions you've had with the person who's sitting there as the defendant? Right of entry can be a major challenge. Violations can be hard to prove, especially with inoperable vehicles, things behind fences, things obscured by vegetation. With few exceptions, the property owner is the responsible party for abating the violation, not the city. We're not in the business of cleaning up people's yards. We're in the business of citing people for their violations. It does not take the responsibility off of the owner for abating the violation. But if we want to have any success with getting those violations abated, especially if we're going to wind up with court, we have to have proof, and that can often take a warrant. And convincing a magistrate that you should be allowed to enter onto private property can be another challenge in and of itself. Just saying that you have a complaint from a neighbor is probably not enough for a magistrate to issue a warrant for you to go onto private properties to conduct an inspection. Punishment versus abatement is, we talked about this when we were talking about the courts. Prosecution may not result in compliance. Just because someone gets a criminal misdemeanor charged to their record, just because they had to pay a fine or court fees, doesn't mean that they're happy with the city and they're going to go clean up the mess that got them there in the first place. They may just decide that they're going to turn their nose up at the city even more and refuse to clean up the violation. Oftentimes they're angry with the city for getting, for starting the mess. Oftentimes they're angry at their neighbors for tattletaling on them. So a lot of times what we see is when we do follow through and take people to court, it doesn't always result in the compliance that people expect when we say we're taking somebody to court. If the violation is cleared and then it returns, unfortunately, we have to start the process all over again. We have a lot of repeat violators in the city, the same thing year after year after year. Sometimes it gets cleaned up a little bit, but it always seems to come back, and that always represents a start of a new process for code enforcement. Next slide. Some of the things we could do to improve operations, we could certainly afford to have more staff dedicated to the calls. In 2006, there were 2 full-time code enforcement inspectors and then 2 part-time code enforcement inspectors that worked evenings and weekends. So that was really a 3 FTE presence in the field. It was pretty effective at amassing a number, a good measurable number of violations. Another big issue was that in 2006, there were 2 building inspectors for the city, and they handled all the property maintenance code. Since that time, it's been the code enforcement inspector that's been expected to handle the property maintenance code load. What you'll find is that code enforcement inspectors often lack the knowledge of building inspectors when it comes to building related issues and the proper means to correct, because a lot of violations when it comes to property maintenance are going to require permits. They're going to require things to be sometimes upgraded to current code. Sometimes they can go back as they are without knowledge of the building code that building inspectors had. Property maintenance code enforcement can be quite a challenge. We have at least 25% more residents than we had in 2006, and we're operating with at least 60% fewer staff allocated to the calls. We could switch from a criminal to civil approach for most violations. Some violations you never want to take the criminal aspect out of. They're just too egregious. But many of the violations that property code enforcement are responsible for could probably be handled through civil penalties. There would be, a civil penalty system where we're issuing tickets and pursuing people for fines rather than everything winding up as a criminal misdemeanor. We don't want to call people criminals, but we certainly want people to understand that we're serious about getting the violations corrected. Sometimes a fine, hitting somebody in the pocketbook for continuing to violate city code is more effective than embarrassing them by dragging them into court and calling them a criminal. Education. We can always implement better community education efforts. We spoke about the first step in every process is to educate the person that's created the violation or the person whose property the violation exists on, because a lot of times people just don't know. So the more you increase your presence in the community and the more you increase people's knowledge of the code and what constitutes an actual violation, the more likely you are to not even have compliance issues in the first place. We could also do a comprehensive code and program analysis. So I mentioned when we were talking about court, sometimes the judge is just uncomfortable with the language of our code. Sometimes we're not happy with the language of our code, but it's a lot of code section. It's a lot to amend. And it's important that you look at what other jurisdictions have had success with, especially when it comes to their success in the courts. So we could always hire a firm to evaluate our current code, evaluate programs around the area and other jurisdictions that actually work, and make recommendations on how we could modify our code and how we could modify our program to see the same levels of success that other jurisdictions have seen. Next slide.
Great. Thank you, Calvin. For the last bullet there, you see in bold, see backup slides for more code amendment options. We're not necessarily going to go over those tonight unless there's a desire to kind of spend more time discussing kind of the code amendments, or we can wait for a future date to as we get into those details, but that is available online for residents and members of the governing body to pull up and review and get more information on some of these options in terms of code amendments. I'm going to hold until these slides catch up on our YouTube. Okay. So some key, let's get 2 slides. Okay, so some key takeaways. I want to thank Chief Lugo and Calvin for doing a good job providing kind of staff perspective on what's going on with parking and the community maintenance. Again, the first point, I've heard a lot since joining the city 3 years ago that we're just not doing these things. Whether we're doing enough of it, I think is certainly debatable, and we can certainly strive to do more, but we have, and you can see especially with the data with the parking enforcement, for how much we've ramped that up and how many tickets we've actually issued. When you look at the percentage of vehicles that we have compared to how many vehicles we've ticketed in a single year, you're talking about almost 20% of vehicles being ticketed. That's a pretty aggressive enforcement. So we have taken that on. So it's not something that we've ignored. Can we do more? Sure. And that's what we've been talking about tonight. What are some additional options? We've been heavily focused on other priorities of building up our financial capacity so that when we make the argument that we should do more, well, then we can then have the resources to actually do more. So number 2, again, we swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States when we take these positions. And within the Constitution of the United States, there are liberties that are placed there, property rights, rights to privacy, rights to due process that we have to uphold. And that's a good protection for our residents and for all of us so that government does not oppress your rights. What that means from a city government perspective, we're severely hamstrung in actually enforcing these things for a good reason, of course, but that just makes our job a lot harder. So we're subject to how, we're hamstrung in how we can actually do the enforcement for very good reasons. And then of course we're subject to the rulings of a judge, and you can never guarantee how a judge is going to rule, whether they're going to favor private property rights over the government ordinances and us enforcing government ordinances against individuals' property rights. So that's going to be an ongoing challenge that we're going to face, but it's a good challenge that exists. Again, the lack of staffing is always a key component when you're looking at the areas of deficits for the city. You can usually pin it down to, well, this area was gutted pretty heavily in the past. When I first took this job on as city manager, what was the big issue? Financial mismanagement, if you will. Well, what was the major department that took the biggest hit in 2009? The finance department. It's not a surprise then that you start having financial mismanagement when you start gutting certain departments, and that's the case here. So we have 0 parking enforcement officers. The City of Falls Church, smaller than we do, they have 2, right? So if we're talking about increasing parking enforcement, we're using other officers who are doing other responsibilities to take on responsibilities in other jurisdictions they actually have divisions to take on. But that's what we do. We all wear multiple hats. We've had to do that to keep the city going. Again, 60% less code enforcement staff from 2006, despite the heavy population growth. You're going to see some issues there in terms of how much enforcement you're seeing when you have that drop off. Another key point from a zoning enforcement standpoint, we've actually combined 4 different functions into one job. So the zoning administration, right? So the responsibility of the code maintenance itself, the review of the different applications that the cities are receiving, right? That's really, if you look at other jurisdictions, that's usually a responsibility in and of itself. Zoning enforcement, which includes kind of inspection, proactive inspection for zoning violations, writing up the notices of violation, tracking that's usually a separate responsibility with ultimate oversight by the zoning administration. City planning, right, and then development services management. There's an entire division that needs to be managed that includes code enforcement and includes building and permitting as well, right? All those 4 functions are combined into one position. We also don't have one building official either. So Calvin mentioned the point. Calvin mentioned the point earlier that we only have one building inspector as well, which limits his ability to help out our code enforcement officer with a lot of these issues. But we don't even have a building official, so our actual community development director has to play that responsibility as well, along with many others. So that's going to always result in, and you'll see in the next slide, kind of not reaching the levels that perhaps of service that our residents are demanding, and that's an explanation for why. And then again, parking shortages, which we hear a lot of major concern about that was actually made worse because of city code, because city code actually prohibited staff from requiring off-street parking requirements when people made additions to their homes. So that was in the code, and you can see the backup slides. We were prohibited from actually requiring additional parking. So you had massive growth, additions in housing, right, extra people in the homes, and then the parking infrastructure was not built, and city staff was prohibited from actually requiring that parking to be built, and that's why you have a lot of parking shortages today. So those are kind of the key takeaways from today. From a management perspective, when you're looking at challenges across the city from all functions, there's always a difference between efficiency, productivity in one corner, and then effectiveness, right? So as a city, we're extremely efficient. That means we're serving a large amount of a population of a set amount of 17,000 people with the lowest staff numbers in the region, right? We're also highly productive. That means that each one employee is serving a lot more residents and actually usually taking on a lot more responsibilities. That's great. You always want to be a lean organization. You want to be efficient. You want to be productive to help kind of keep tax rates low. However, if you want to increase productivity even more and provide additional services, there's ways to do that, right? You can increase technology and utilize technology to leverage your ability to do more. You can do process improvements, but usually process improvements require a team and shifting how they actually operate. In most instances, we have 0 people doing that responsibility, so it's a second or tertiary responsibility of another person who has another primary job, or we're limited in the amount of people that we have, so process improvement is not always feasible. And if you want to improve productivity as well, adding the additional resources to enhance that productivity is another way. So the consequence of such short staffing levels that the city has is that we lack the service delivery effectiveness, right? But what I mean by effectiveness is there's a certain expectation of service delivery levels from our community that we're not able to meet, even despite being efficient and productive and utilizing technology to the best of our ability. So it's not a surprise that we usually end up having performance deficits or receiving a lot of complaints from areas where staffing was gutted during the Great Recession. I mentioned the financial example before. Transportation, the biggest part of our CIP, right? We have a water and sewer and stormwater engineer who does a great job. We don't have an actual transportation official, despite managing multiple major transportation projects in our city. That's another example where we see kind of the complaints, and we just don't have that robust program. Most jurisdictions will end up having a transportation official or a transportation department to manage those functions. We don't. And so there's a trade-off, right, in terms of financial allocation to actually resolving these issues and service levels that can be attained with limited resources. So those are just trade-offs that I want everyone to be aware of. Just like during the downtown discussion, we talked about trade-offs with tax rates, with debt, with all those other things, and how growth can help kind of alleviate some of those trade-offs as well. Same thing, economic development can help alleviate some of these concerns because it gives you those extra financial resources to increase service levels without necessarily putting pressure on tax rates themselves to go up. The use of technology, again, that's always going to be probably the best in the 20th century, now 21st century, way to enhance productivity is the utilization of technology. We are actively doing that. We inherited a situation where most of our technology is backwards, outdated, and we're taking steps to alleviate that. With the police, we implemented Tyler Encode, which was a software that allowed that better tracking and billing for actual ticketing for parking enforcement. That didn't exist before. We actually now have that technology, and we're in the process now. The governing body just approved implementation of a software called Dude Solutions, which is specifically for the Community Development Department, the Public Works, and also Code Enforcement. All those different elements that Calvin's department manages, that software is specifically designed for that department to help enhance their productivity. So we will always evaluate technology solutions as well, not just staffing, right? We'll always evaluate technology to enhance our productivity. Technology also comes at a cost, but the issue is always going to be, especially for code enforcement, because of the interactions that are required between the city staff and violators, it's always a human function. It's always a personnel function. It's not, you can never replace it with technology, at least now. We don't know in the future, but at least now it's a person function, and it's constrained by the realities of there's only so much time, right, and so many resources or so many employees right? It's a fixed model or mathematical model for how much you can get done based off the number of employees you have and the amount of time that you have as well, which is why we bring up those issues. So that's kind of a management perspective as we think about how we want to tackle these problems. Parking, we talked about a lot of the issues, and the 30-day one is a big question, because we get complaints from residents, very justified complaints about people from the county or outside the city parking in our city, on our city streets, right? They're not paying our taxes and they're parking on city streets, taking the parking spaces away from our residents when there's already such a shortage of parking spaces. Unfortunately, if those vehicles, those residents are established residents of other jurisdictions with vehicles registered to those jurisdictions, we're very limited. We can certainly try to ticket them, but they can prove otherwise, right? That they don't actually have to register their vehicle with the city. So that really limits our enforcement capabilities for that function. So if we really want to talk about alleviating the parking shortages that we're seeing, especially on the western side of the city, there's three options that we could evaluate, right? One is allowing for permit parking only, so allow neighborhoods to petition the governing body to allow their street or their neighborhood to require a specific permit sticker on their car that only those people with those stickers can park on those streets, usually during designated hours, right? That's one way. From a city staff perspective, it adds an additional administrative burden, because now we have to issue these additional stickers for people and track that. But also it's unfair to other residents in the city who are paying our taxes, but now we're saying they can't park on certain public streets. A second option, which is more appealing than that first and very similar, is allowing neighborhoods to petition the governing body for establishing decal-only parking overnight. And that ensures that only city residents who have valid city decals can park on the streets in those neighborhoods overnight. Again, this would eliminate that 30-day waiting period and allow police to expand the amount of tickets that they start applying. They don't have to keep monitoring and establish that 30-day period. If it's parked there without a city decal that night, they can just issue it a ticket. And again, there's no additional administrative burden from this solution, because the decals are already being issued to our residents. And then third, we can do a general decal parking, right? We can do this across the city. We can just say, if you want to park on city streets overnight, or if we want to just limit it to the west side where the most severe parking shortages exist, you're required to have a valid city decal. That's another policy proposal we could pursue. That has all the benefits of number two. It has the added benefits of even further enhancing personal property tax compliance as well. To make this one happen, number three, and as another option as well for expanding kind of parking capacity, we'd have to evaluate the utilization of actual city or public parking lots for residents, either to park their vehicles if we don't do any of these, but if we just want to increase parking capacity, or if we want to do this one, right, and people are struggling with where do their visitors park, right? If they're limited in terms of they don't have a driveway, they don't have a garage, where are their visitors parking? Probably the best thing to set up would be some kind of public parking lot structure at Costello, City Hall, and Blooms Park for visitors to park, and then residents can shuttle them back if we were to pursue any of these routes. So that's an important caveat to that strategy. And what I did here is I just, from all the different things that were mentioned in this brief, I wanted to put them all in one slide as kind of a guide, a roadmap, if you will, going forward, to reference back to this slide about what are our options. And we may have missed options. We're always open to hearing additional options as well and evaluating those options. But these are from what we've seen as kind of the next steps of evaluating kind of what to do to enhance, to address these issues. Again, staffing is going to be the key one. Getting up to the kind of comparable levels of a Falls Church should be step one for parking if we really want to enhance parking enforcement beyond what we're doing already. And then again, for code enforcement, we discussed that as well. We discussed the permit parking solution or the decal parking, either neighborhood, west side, or entire city, evaluating those policies and what the preferences of the community in terms of what direction we want to take. The use of public parking lots, either for residents and or visitors. Adding the city decal requirement to an operable vehicle code. Currently, our inoperable vehicle, we can designate a vehicle inoperable and ticket them for that, or cite them for that if they don't have the proper state license plates. We can't do that for the city decal, so that's not an option. So we can certainly add that to the code to give us an extra enforcement tool. Requiring additional off-street parking for single-family additions. I mean, the ship has sailed on that one, unfortunately. A lot of the additions have already occurred, but you can see there's still ongoing additions happening all the time. So we want to not make the problem worse and at least change that code so that we can require additional off-street parking. Reducing limitations on driveway width and lot coverage. Please look at the back of the slide because it does show kind of example of what that looks like. The downside is going to be the aesthetics of what that actually looks like if you do it, but it certainly would help reduce kind of the parking shortages that we have.
Could you address that? I'm sorry, because I didn't see that number 8.
I don't have it either.
Yeah, could you address that? What is the limit? What are the current limitations? And
Well, yeah, I can go to that after, if you don't mind. I'll go. It's in one of the backup slides. It just shows a picture of expanded, widened parking lot. I hope I didn't accidentally delete it, but I'll go through it and see if it's on here. If it's missing, we'll be certain to re-upload that. There have been so many different versions that I may have accidentally deleted that.
that's okay.
But aesthetically, it just doesn't look good when you have very wide parking lots.
Okay.
Let me do that afterwards. All right, so next one, prohibiting commercial vehicles in residentially zoned neighborhoods. This is something that Fairfax County does, so we can actually evaluate their ordinance, see how they actually do this, to see if we actually want to consider just eliminating commercial vehicles parking in residential areas to kind of reduce that parking burden that we're seeing from commercial vehicles. So again, first step for that one, evaluate what Fairfax County's doing, how is it working, what are the pros and cons, and see if we actually want to do that or not. Calvin raised this issue. Before we take some of these on, we may want to do kind of a comprehensive code analysis, see what else is there. So we do kind of one sweeping legislation to kind of address all of the code limitations that we currently have. Expanded public education is always a better thing that we can do, and hopefully with a streamlined website that we're going to be looking to pursue, that will help with our ability to constantly engage with our community. Right now our website is extremely outdated. It's not user friendly. We're very limited in terms of what we can do with that. And then again, the big one that Calvin discussed was the concept of moving from the standard violation process that we have right now and just issuing tickets instead, to kind of ratchet up enforcement, ratchet up penalties for repeat offenders. But with everything, right, think about it from a law enforcement perspective. Laws exist, right? Enforcement exists. Crime still happens, right? No matter what we do here, there's going to be continual violations of laws, right? It is a never-ending battle. It doesn't mean we can't do more. It doesn't mean we can't do better. We certainly can do all those things, but there should never be an expectation that we can wipe something out completely, right? To Calvin's point, most people aren't even aware of a lot of these codes as well. So just because we're going to pursue more robust solutions, that nothing will be 100% cure. There are certainly good things that would severely help, including the decal parking requirement. That would really help reduce kind of the parking deficits that we're seeing right now because of out of city residents parking their vehicles in our community. So there certainly are better solutions that we can adopt to at least significantly enhance what we're doing right now. So we have a Q&A sheet, but I'm going to really turn it over to the mayor to see kind of what your preference is in terms of how you want to do this. We've received 22 questions online so far, so I don't know if you would like for us to go over those first.
I think we should take the resident questions first.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll start here.
Color coded by name.
Okay, so the first question we received, and again, if some of these are off topic, we really want to focus on parking and code enforcement. We'll evaluate some of these other ones and potentially add them to the follow-up kind of Word document that we'll publish. Parking on Digital Drive, is it temporary or permanent? So the parking on Digital Drive was a permanent change once the city lights, once the public lights were put up on digital. So that is a permanent change. Where were those folks parking before Digital Drive parking? I can't definitively say where, but I'm assuming the surrounding residential areas is where those vehicles were parking. So then now they have potentially more flexibility to park closer to where they live, whereas perhaps before they were parking further away. And so it's also a safety issue because no one honors the 25-mile speed limit. So we've done some investigations. Our police has put out the tracker there, Digital Drive. So, and we have increased kind of patrol of that area as well. The data doesn't demonstrate the amount of speeding that is being posited as existing, but that didn't stop us from sending additional police to monitor that area as well. And we'll continue to do that if residents continue to be concerned about speeding on Digital Drive. Parking in the turnaround circle at the end of West Carondelet is a real concern for me. I think it poses a safety hazard for the folks, the cars and trucks currently parking there, and for the fire and emergency vehicles. There's no way for a fire truck to gain access. Okay, and access to the fire hydrant seems to be impossible. So we'll follow up. I'll have the fire chief take a look at that specific area and see if there is a concern there. So thank you for bringing that up. We will take a look at that circle and see if there is a fire issue and evaluate what we can do in terms of limiting parking there if that's a requirement. But again, each time we start prohibiting parking, we get the pushback that there's not enough parking. So again, with every public policy, there's always going to be trade-offs between safety requirements and actual allowing for additional parking. So we'll take a look at that and we'll balance against the need for the additional parking as well. Okay, so will you be discussing what the city is able to do about blighted and abandoned homes in the community? It's actually as part of our FAQ sheet that's online. It's the very last question. So if you want to bring that up, Keith.
Yes.
Okay, you can scroll all the way to the bottom.
1 second.
See that? Okay, actually go up a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So please look at question 13 for the community maintenance section. It asks that question. We do have the ability again to acquire blighted properties by use of eminent domain. We cite the actual state code for that. There's one property that's had significant issues. We just haven't had the money again to pursue the actual acquisition and demolition. We do have that filing for the first year. We put that in our CIP. It was part of the downtown model because the downtown was approved. We are going to have funding to start taking on that responsibility. However, we're first going to evaluate and exhaust all the means to potentially pursue a tax sale of that property to hopefully selling to someone who's going to actually address the issue, because if not, then we're back to going ahead condemning and demolishing that home. So there's a lot more information here, Keith, if you want to scroll down to the very bottom. So Calvin provides in this answer kind of a step-by-step process all the way to the bottom. Go to the next page. Yeah, so you can see, and keep going, this section right here, kind of a step-by-step process for what that entails. So if you're interested in that topic, I please urge you to read this. We spent a little bit more time on that than other questions because this came up recently. Okay. Okay. So helping elderly and sick residents, again, that's not really on topic, but that has been a #1 priority in terms of our COVID-19 response. I will say that, and we can certainly follow up in a follow-up discussion about what we've been doing. But that has been priority #1 for our COVID-19 response, and we did do a significant outreach and assistance to our elderly in our community. All right, library and the community center, again, that's really off topic, but we can certainly follow up at a later date.
Can you repeat the whole question? That way
Sure, okay. Okay, so I'll read the next one. Could you update us on the current initiative to ensure every car in Manassas Park has taxes paid and property decal? So I think this was an earlier question. I think we have gone over that extensively. We've ramped up enforcement of the, we instituted the decal was the #1 thing we did, right? So the city moved away from the decals and we had a couple-year kind of evaluation process of how that worked. We decided to go back to the decals and go to the annual decal to enhance our law enforcement's ability to go out there and actually enforce. And you can see that the amount of ticketing that we've ramped up continues to from FY19 to 20, and then the first 2 months of 21 the amount of tickets being issued continues to ramp up. So we are heavily enforcing. So reinstituting the annual decals was a great move by the governing body. It gave us that tool to go out and enforce that. Again, that doesn't catch everyone. We still have the limitations. So if we want to be even more robust, again, the parking enforcement division and the overnight decal requirements are going to be the solutions for that one. Okay, next question. What initiatives is the city currently taking to attempt to make the existing retail space at City Center more attractive? Again, I refer you please to see the links. We actually have a rezoning public hearing this Tuesday. There's messaging on our city website about that. The developer has put up on their website a presentation, and it has a bunch of links to all the public hearings, the virtual town hall that it is. So you're going to find a lot more information about our downtown strategy there. But that's, along with financial management, that has been the top priority for the city until COVID-19. Okay, number 8. How many police officers does the city currently have? Is that number comparable to other cities of our size? So we do that in every year as part of our budget presentation. We show those numbers, and Chief Lugo or Deputy Chief Reinhardt, can you pull up those numbers, please, in terms of it's usually in that budget slide that we have about the per capita comparison. So we do have 36 patrol officers, but I want to make sure we have the per capita number. So
It's the 1.9.
I believe so. So Chief Lugo, are you still there? Do we need that?
He's on.
Is he unmuted? Go ahead and mute.
He's not muted.
Chief, are you there? We can't hear you. Okay, well, we'll get back to you. We have it as part of our budget presentation every year. We show the per capita numbers to how we stack up to other jurisdictions. And we're even below towns, and the thing with towns is they get additional support from the county. So that it demonstrates the kind of the low levels of staffing that we're on. So I apologize for the technical difficulties. Normally we're at the actual governing body chambers, but because of early voting, we had to shift the location. So we're having some technical difficulties tonight, so I want to apologize for that.
Lazo, on the
Yeah.
previous question, there may have been a reference to, or perhaps maybe he means that because it's privately owned, that what we can do is limited.
For
Right?
what is that?
For the city center.
For the city center.
Yeah, I'm saying that wasn't necessarily on topic to this, but I
Okay.
wanted to refer them to the downtown discussion because I
Okay.
go over that extensively in
Yeah.
my previous presentations
Okay.
about everything that's wrong with City Center and what we're doing
Okay, thank
to
you.
fix it.
Thank
But
you.
you're absolutely right, it
Okay.
is privately owned, and
Yeah.
that's one of the many reasons why we're seeing issues with that.
Okay.
But again, that will take a long time if I want to go over everything that's wrong with that. Okay. If a resident sees abandoned or junk cars in the neighborhood, chickens roaming in the street, or other clear violations of existing code, what is the best approach to notify the city? So we actually, on our website in the city services section, you'll see a section there. Can you pull that up, Keith? You can show people how to actually contact the zoning and code enforcement. But I do, so the current website is not great. We're going to improve that. We're going to enhance. We're working on that right now to improve through Dude Solutions and the new website, that public interface so that you can actually upload questions to us on your mobile or concerns. So if you go to government or city services and go down to, where was it? Oh, code enforcement. So click on that. So city services on our website, code enforcement. Yep, report zoning and coding violations. That's always going to be the best way to reach out. So scroll down. So you'll see the phone numbers there, and there's fillable spaces there as well. It doesn't have the email as well. Where did that page go? Scroll down.
Can you hear me now? This is Chief Lugo.
Sender. That's the sender.
No, our email.
Oh.
Remember we established that email?
Yeah, we can hear you, Chief.
Go up. Okay. So you fill this out or go all the way up. Okay, so go to city services, and actually this time click on code enforcement. Okay, now scroll down. All the way down. Okay, yeah. If you see a potential, click here, or you can see the email there as well. So we established that email. If you want to do a direct email to our staff, you can do that as well. So that's going to be the best way to reach out to us. On our future website, we will have an actual icon on the main page, where you can just click on that if you have any code enforcement concerns. So, Chief, you're back on, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of the per capita numbers for our law enforcement department?
But currently, the Manassas Park Police Department is supposed to be 34 sworn. We have 3 frozen positions, so we're down to 31. And per capita, we're operating at 1.9, which is 26% under the resident to ratio in the area.
Okay.
So if we compare them up to other agencies like Falls Church, they're at 33 with a 2.2 per capita rating. Town of Culpeper, which is approximately 18,000 population, there were 43 officers at 2.3 per capita.
Yeah.
In order for us to get up to the area average, we would need to add 11 additional officers to our agency.
Yeah. And the town of Culpeper is a great example because, again, they get that additional county support as a town that cities do not, since so we have additional responsibilities and we have that limited.
That's a testament to their performance.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you look at those
Yeah.
parking enforcement, the amount of
Yeah.
tickets that are being issued, the amount of calls that we're taking, and the proactive enforcement, because we do proactive patrols for our police. That's something we're limited in our community development department because of the the lack of staffing completely there. We're really complaints based. In police, we do proactive at least for crime and traffic violation enforcement and some parking as well. But really, for parking, it's really going to be generated by complaint basis as well. Okay, so next question here. So the sidewalks and street corners on the old side are in pretty bad shape, full of weeds and cracks. Is there any kind of maintenance schedule for these public areas? There is. The problem is that there, again, it's a resource constraint. So from best estimates from our community development department, in order to do proper maintenance of our streets and our sidewalks, we'd have to be spending on every year about $1 million on those functions to get to everything, and so that everything actually stays in a good shape. We only spend $250,000 right now. We're very limited in terms of financial resources. If the quality of our transportation is a key priority for our residents, which per the in-person town halls we did back in December, it was one of the top priorities for our residents. We can certainly consider shifting some of the profits from the downtown development for additional investments in our streets and our sidewalks for the proper maintenance of that. But again, that's going to be a policy decision in the future to have once we have those resources. But we do have a schedule. We did what's called a windshield survey of all of our streets and sidewalks. And we have them prioritized in terms of deterioration. There's some that kind of are equally in bad shape, but if we're getting more complaints about one, honestly, we'll kind of prioritize that one as well. But we're limited each year in how much we do. We have a private contractor who will do that work for us, but we can only spend so much each year on that.
I would just want to add, I think the questioner, the way you said it, because I don't have it up, that the questioner is expecting the city to go out and weed eat sidewalks because they're deeming them public areas when they need to be done by the homeowners.
Well, he says weeds and cracks, right? So those are kind of structural issues.
Right, but weeds as in like going out and actually weed eating the edging of the sidewalks. Like the city doesn't do that.
Yeah.
But I think that's what the questioner is expecting in that question, is that the city is actually out there with weed eaters on lawnmowers doing those, and we don't do that. That's not our responsibility.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. So Manassas City and Prince William County currently have websites where people can check that construction work is permitted. Will the new Manassas Park website have a comparable feature? So that would be our goal. So we are evaluating a GIS platform that would make doing something like that feasible. It's called Esri. Most localities across the country utilize Esri, and that's what we're actually evaluating right now. So we're hopefully we'll get to that point. That is a technology enhancement that we will evaluate. But that is a great point. There's other things that we want to do better at in terms of communication with our residents and providing information as well. So how are we working to enforce code without taxing the working poor in our community? So I'm assuming that question is referring to does code enforcement impact poor communities more than others. And you can see, we haven't necessarily mapped the code enforcement, so that's something we'll do with the new software. But from a parking, it's one of the reasons why we map the parking tickets. But you can see that's scattered throughout the community, right? So we're equal opportunity enforcers from that standpoint. But certainly we always want to be cognizant of how we're pursuing enforcement and enforcing the law by the letter of the law, and never punishing one area or one group of people more than others. So we remain committed to that. How much of city revenue does enforcement use? Let me pull up the budget here. By enforcement, I guess we'll talk code enforcement, because parking, it's zero because we don't really have any parking enforcement officers. So we're just relying on police, so we're shifting resources from other areas to handle that. Let me pull up my budget real quick. So the Central Development Services Division, it's beyond just enforcement. I would have to let me do some follow-up analysis, because we combine a lot of things in our budget. So I will follow up with an actual number for code enforcement itself, how much city revenue, the development services budget. Let me look at the actuals for last year. We have actuals. $357,000 is what we spent in that division in FY19 as an actual, but I'll get you better numbers and follow up via social media.
What was that number? I'm sorry, was that all like
That was the entire kind of development
community
services.
development?
Yeah.
Development services.
Yep. Okay. Is the city looking to add additional lighting throughout the city?
I mean, are there specific, could you ask the person, is there a specific street they're referring to? I mean, is there a specific area
Yeah.
of concern?
I mean, to Calvin, I haven't, at least from my time, been privy to any additional lighting strategy from the city. I could be missing that one, but if you're still on the
So
line.
the current agreement with lighting in the city is that the lights were installed with the original subdivision, and Novec actually provides power to those lights. If we want to add street lights, we would have to pay the cost of the installation of those street lights, and then we could possibly convince Novec to then take on maintenance of those lights in accordance with the franchise agreement. But the city would have to develop a capital program for installing additional streetlights throughout the city and absorb the cost of the initial installation.
Yeah, and so that's right. So in our CIP, we really don't have anything for that. And I guess to Councilman Shoemaker's point, if you could follow up with us and let us know where you have lighting concerns, and that's something potentially, we can evaluate from a CIP standpoint if that's something we want to take on if we do see that as a critical need. So if you don't mind, just kind of letting us know where you see the additional requirements. Okay. So there was a statement in the presentation, common misconception, we do not enforce parking violations. What was that regarding? That's just been social media posting, messaging that I've been seeing since I've joined the organizations about, well, why don't we just enforce, right? The statement's always made. We do, but again, it goes back to my slide of effectiveness. Are we enforcing at the level that the community demands? I take it people listening in today are concerned about that, so certainly we're not meeting the level of demand that many residents would like, so we need to enhance that level. We do need to find out, is broad range, is this a perception of the entire community or not, and we just don't have that. But based off of kind of the feedback we've had, it sounds like it is. but I don't want to misrepresent kind of the view of the public. Okay, so I didn't hear the chief mention parking distance from the curb. Care to elaborate on the 6 inches law versus 12 inches? So we actually just changed that to 12 inches at the last governing body meeting. So a resident did reach out to us with a complaint. We did the evaluation of other jurisdictions. We brought that back to the governing body, and the governing body acted pretty quickly to go ahead and change that ordinance. So that issue has been addressed. So if overnight decal option is used, would there be visitor passes for overnight guests? That is an option. So that would be an additional administrative burden. Our preference would just be to utilize public parking lots for that purpose, but certainly if that's deemed to be too inconvenient for residents and there's a strong demand for visitor passes, that's something we can evaluate, and ultimately the governing body would decide whether we pursue that or not, but that would be something that the city then would have to actively issue. So you're talking about an additional administrative burden on likely the police department, who's in other jurisdiction manages kind of the permitting neighborhoods that are permitted. They're the administrative component that manages that. Our administrative capacity at the police department is very limited. It is something we're going to be evaluating here because we have a lot of uncollected parking tickets. So within the next few weeks, we're actually going to be bringing that issue up in terms of expanding that administrative capacity to capture that additional lost revenue as well, and to help out with other options such as this one if we want to go the visitor pass route, if the overnight decal option is a serious option that will be considered. So it is very difficult to find a parking space on Cabell Drive near the police department. I think that's a common issue across, especially the western half of the city. There just isn't a lot of available parking, and again, we discussed in the presentation why that is in terms of the lack of the city staff's ability to require additional parking with additions. So that's where we got to the discussion of what are the options, whether it's permit only or overnight decal, to really reduce, because there's not a lot of infrastructure options that we have. We can't just build a bunch of garages in each neighborhood. There's not a lot of infrastructure tools that we have to leverage besides our existing public parking lots, potentially building some additional, but you're not going to get those close enough. So it's really just either the decal or the permits that are going to limit at least people from outside of the community parking in that area, and hopefully freeing up some parking spaces for our residents. Yeah, so there's a question about parking on the street when there's snow. So that there are some routes that are designated as emergency routes where vehicles are required to move. But if the question's asking, are you required to kind of clean your car out if you're not on one of those roads? Yes. I'm not quite sure what the question is asking, but if you don't mind kind of elaborating on what's being asked with the snow there.
I think the way I read it was that like cars that are semi-permanent there and they don't clear their cars off and there's snow all around,
yeah.
and the resident, especially down on Colburn and other areas, and then so the residents go out, they're trying to clear a spot for their car, or they clear out their car, but these other vehicles are sitting there and they're not cleared out because they live over in Prince Williams. They don't care if it's blocked in for 2 weeks while they let it solar melt because they're not going to drive it.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah,
just when I
okay.
took, that's how I took the question was,
Yeah.
you got cars kind of there, they're not cleared off, there's no, they can't clear that spot, there's snow around it.
Yeah. So Calvin, I don't know if there's anything that requires a kind of a certain time limit for clearing that out. I'm not sure if that exists. If you don't know, Calvin, don't worry about it. That's something we can investigate further to see if that requirement exists in our code, or if it doesn't, do we even have the authority from the state to do something like that?
Well, definitely on the snow emergency routes.
Yeah. Some emergency routes, yeah, where
Right.
cars have to move.
Have to move and they have to be cleared. We can tow them if we can tow the vehicles on snow emergency routes if they don't clear off, so that we can at least clear snow all the way to the curb.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll evaluate our code, see if that exists.
Maybe a reminder, even though it's not winter, maybe a reminder of which streets in the city are actually snow emergency routes, because, you know, it's Manassas Drive, Polk, Matthew, you know, I think Brandon,
Yeah, you're
and
saying
some other
putting out
ones.
some messaging.
Just reminding people, like, at least at a minimum of which streets are
Yeah,
the snow emergency route streets.
And we have the signs up too, but a lot of people aren't gonna pay attention to it.
Maybe to have it on our website, like, permanently, because then, like, if somebody forgets, you know, that they could look at it, or somebody moves on to one, like, they may not realize that Matthew Drive is a snow emergency route, because it's kind of a side street.
Yeah, you can do that. Okay, so any chance we can privatize code enforcement until we get violations under control? This is extremely difficult to do with one code enforcement officer. So we share the concern about being able to do this with one code enforcement officer. I wouldn't want to privatize, at least from the city manager's perspective, privatize, we value our code enforcement officer. Instead of adding staff, could you utilize contract support? Yeah, that's shown to be more effective than bringing on additional staff, and it allows you to kind of fluctuate in terms of service levels, so we could expand the contract when we need more enforcement. We can scale it back when we feel things have, we have things under control. But does a company exist out there that would do that? That's something we would have to research, if that's even an option in terms of getting additional contracted support for code enforcement versus adding additional staff. Can you use a drone in cases where you can't enter the property? Dean, I'm gonna defer you to you on that one, but I would guess that drones do not allow us to access and violate people's expectations of privacy. So Dean, the question is, can we use a drone in cases where we can't enter the property? So I'm imagining to kind of view people's backyards and investigate. I don't know if that's something you know, or if we just need to follow back up. I'm meeting him.
Is Dean on?
He is on.
Is he?
Okay, so we're having some technical difficulties again, but we'll follow up with the city attorney and get an answer. But I don't believe we can. I believe that drones, that would be an invasion of privacy from the government to do that. But again, I don't take me up on that. We have to follow up with the city attorney to get verification of that. Okay, so privatizing parking enforcement. So again, adding additional contract support for parking enforcement. Again, it's an option. I can have the police department look at that versus adding additional staff utilizing contract support. That can always be an option for us to evaluate. But again, we would bring that back as an option to the governing body and kind of lay out the pros and cons of using contract support versus staff.
There's always the financial aspect of that.
Yeah. And the amount of control and expectations, values, and things like that. Okay, so my house doesn't have a driveway, and people from other neighborhoods park in front of my house, sometimes blocking my stairway. Is there a way I can claim a parking spot on the street like Bell Drive? So in our presentation, Chief Lugo, that's kind of one of the common questions that the police get. The answer is no. For our current city code, those are public streets, public right-of-ways, so everyone has kind of the same rights to access it. If they're anyone has a right to access it now and utilize and park it. What the question is, do we want to limit it to residents only via decal requirements? That's another subject. But no, you currently cannot do that. So can a commercial vehicle park on the street? Is it a violation to do so? So it depends. And can you bring up the FAQ? There was that one question of it. Let me see if I can find the specific question.
Here it is. It's what can the city do regarding large work trucks and vans that park in city neighborhoods and occupy a significant amount of space? What about commercial vehicles with out-of-state license plates? It's on your parking enforcement number 7.
So go. I'll wait, it's page 2. Keep going all the way.
It says there's a section that says
Go down to 7.
prohibiting motor trucks.
Question number 7. Scroll down. Yeah, the next page.
Yeah, it says there's for motor trucks, which I don't know what that definition
Okay.
is.
Yeah. So this is it. So the only regulations we have for commercial vehicles in residential areas is gonna be that section that Councilman Shoemaker just referenced, section 24.51, which prohibits motor trucks. If you look up the code, it defines what a motor truck is. Calvin, I don't know if you're still there or not, if you can pull that up while I'm talking. When I'm done, maybe you can define what motor truck is for our residents. But that's really it in terms of regulations for commercial vehicles. We did discuss in our presentation, again, that Fairfax County option where they do prohibit that. So that is a code. If there's a strong demand to prohibit all commercial vehicles, not just motor trucks in residential neighborhoods, that's a code that we can evaluate and see what the pros and cons are of doing something like that. So Calvin, are you still on?
Yeah, so a motor truck is defined as a vehicle weighing over 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, or a vehicle having more than 2 axles on the vehicle, or a vehicle that has more than 6 tires in contact with the roadway surface, or a vehicle that is over 24 feet in length.
Great, thank you, Calvin.
So it's more than 2 axles, more than 6 tires. It's more than 24 feet long. And what was the fourth one? I'm sorry.
Did you hear that? Can you repeat the four criteria? Calvin?
6 feet tires.
Yeah, it's
touching the
10,000
surface.
pounds gross vehicle
10,000.
weight,
Yep, 10,000.
more than 2 axles, more than 6 tires in contact with the roadway surface, or a total overall length of more than 24 feet.
So the next question, this is a good one because we get very similar questions all the time about kind of lawn maintenance, and it is in our FAQ as well. But this one says, so my neighbor had an above ground pool in his lot, removed it, and the yard still looks awful. Grass, patchy sand. I have to look at it every day. The fence is too low to hide it. Is he in violation? So if the grass is higher than the 10 inches, then yes, we could cite them for that. But if you look at the FAQ that we posted, we're very limited in terms of beyond grass, what we can enforce. We can't really enforce kind of improperly maintained laws, right? That's very subjective. So we don't operate like an HOA. A lot of HOAs will kind of put requirements. We don't have that authority. The authority we do have is per state code is directly with grass. Even with trees, we can't necessarily regulate trees unless there's a threat of that tree, either no longer a threat, but actually on blocking public right-of-way, on public right-of-way, or a threat to fall onto public right-of-way. That's where the city would get involved. But we do get a lot of complaints about people being concerned about trees from their neighbor encroaching on their property. That's a civil issue, so the government doesn't have the authority, or at least in Virginia, to actually require one resident to take a specific action against another. That's going to be a civil issue that a court would have to decide between 2 civil parties. I know that's a source of frustration for many of our residents, but it's something that the city government's prohibited from getting involved in. We don't necessarily want to take sides in the civil matter anyways, but it's really just grass. So we share the concern about unkept lawns and just the lack of maintenance. It's just that the state code doesn't authorize us as a locality to do much about it beyond just regulating the height of grass. I believe that's the last question we got from the public. I guess we could open it up to any questions from the governing body.
Did any questions come in via phone or email? Okay, yeah, okay.
There's 25 questions.
I guess I want to bring.
Can you hear me yet?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Dean, do you want to
I had
answer?
to hang up and call back in. I don't know what the problem was, but just to answer the question that you asked before, no, we cannot use drones to get around the requirement to get permission from the landowner to look in the backyard for code enforcement purposes.
Okay. Thanks, Dean.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Well, I was going to just bring up, and it's not one I saw on the YouTube feed, but I think I wanted to bring it up to address it because it's something I think we all probably hear quite a bit is, well, my neighbor has license plates or a car with license plates from Maryland, and we hear that quite a bit. And I'm going to be real frank is that, in the past, documentation issues in our immigrant community forced people to register their vehicles in Maryland because Virginia just didn't allow it. So I think there's a perception that there is an intent to purposefully evades state and city taxes by doing that, and actually it was not allowed under state law. And I believe, if maybe Dean can answer this, I believe on this past July 1st, that just changed. So, you know, I just encourage people that weren't able to register a vehicle in Virginia, that I believe they can start doing so, and they can also register with the city and get a decal. You know, it's above our pay grade what the federal immigration laws of this country are. We don't set them. We have to enforce whatever is done. But, you know, in the past, a lot of people were trying to follow the law, and Virginia law didn't allow them to register a vehicle in the state. And so I think a lot of the vehicles that people see are not visitors, and they're not purposefully evading. I think they were trying to be compliant. And now that the state laws changed, now we can do more proactive education and enforcement as well on our part. So I want to put that out there because I do hear that complaint a lot, and I think that
And more revenue.
right, absolutely, it brings more revenue in so that all of us can pay less when everybody pays their share. So.
And for that reason, we always take an out-of-state registration. We have 96 out-of-state vehicles paying personal property taxes to Manassas Park.
Oh, really?
Interesting. Okay.
So we've always done that ever since that 9/11, and everybody went to that.
Oh, so there are people even currently
Mhm.
with
Sure.
a different state registration, but because it is housed here, that they're paying the city personal property. and
Yeah,
it's
I can't force them to put the decal on their car, but
They are.
they are paying it, yes.
Yeah, we can't enforce them to change their plate either. It's just
Right.
just registering their vehicle and having to pay the personal property tax. And our police can only enforce that with traffic stops. So it's an actual moving vehicle violation. They can't just go around. And it's in our FAQ question 5 in the parking section. They can't just actively patrol the streets and start ticketing vehicles that don't have the Virginia plates. It has to be a moving violation, that when they stop someone and they start inquiring about it, that's when they're able to actually ticket them.
Yeah,
We want to make a public awareness campaign also about the issue that you raised, that people
Right, and-
can't go now.
Yeah, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
well, I was just going to make a point too, is that, you know, I hear that concern a lot, and so, you know, I want to make sure that now that the law has changed, that we're gonna address it, and that people can feel free to come into Debbie's office and come into DMV and make those changes now, because I think there's probably not a lot of awareness with, you know, kind of everything in our world that's been going on. That was probably a law that kind of got missed, you know, with COVID and with school and with just what's going on in the world. That was probably something that got missed by the general public, but that we can start making improvements on that.
And to Debbie's point, when you provide those stickers, say to the 96 vehicles that you referenced, is it possible to let them know that although you're not forcing them to place the decal on, it's good neighborly relations that their neighbors will know that they have purchased their decals?
We do what we can, but the treasurer's office sells the decals, so
I
they
see.
would.
No, we
I
have to
see,
create one.
okay. Yeah, that might be worthwhile for them to, you know, suggest that the people put it on the car or the truck.
We have had people that come in that they've got a ticket and I had the decal in my purse, or I left it at home. Put it on your car, you would have got a ticket. Common sense, but
Okay, thank you. Alana, do you have any questions?
Nope, I don't.
Okay. The folks at home, let's, Vice Mayor Banks, do you have any questions? Are you there, Preston? Okay, let's go on to Hector, Councilmember Sendejas.
Yes, hi, thank you for the presentation. I have a question about, I guess, like the governing body. Is there a plan to vote on, I guess, parking, restriction in the near future, or is it something that is not priority in the city?
Well, I don't think we've had a study. I don't think staff has really analyzed it sufficiently. So I can't see it coming forward in the near future.
I mean, we could. We certainly, we cover a lot of points. We could have a more, we know what the options are, right? I've laid out kind of what I saw in terms of the cons with the permit only. So in my mind, it really is the decal option, whether it's gonna be neighborhood or citywide. That's really more of a, where you all have to kind of provide input in terms of what the community really demands. We're gonna do a survey, and we have this on the screen here. Keith is gonna share this with the public, an actual survey related to parking community maintenance, just kind of gauge kind of how high a level of priority this is. But if it is a significant priority and our residents want something done to expand parking, options by limiting out of city residents parking here, I do think that the decal option is probably going to be the best option for us. Whether we want to do by neighborhood, all the west side, or the entire city, again, that's really going to be your discretion. There's other code stuff that, I think we probably want to engage someone to do the full code analysis, come back with recommendations for other codes. But in terms of the actual parking, I think that's something that we could discuss further sooner rather than later. And then the staffing, of course, we lack the financial resources right now, unless we want to prioritize it through.
We just need to try to think of all the unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Hector, with this survey, that could be something that all 7 of us, in addition to the city and the departments, could try to get out into the community so we have a maximum response. In other words, we don't want to hear from just one small group of folks. We want to hear from a broad spectrum of residents. Did that answer your question? Did that answer it?
Yeah, I guess because I do live on the west side, I hear more frequently about the parking concerns, especially from vehicles outside the city. So I just want to make sure that, I could listen to all of our residents and see if they feel it's a priority or not for us to tackle.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Do you have a follow-up, Hector?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Machado, do you have a question?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. The only question that I always get is the Commissioner of the Revenue office open today? Do you know the schedule? How can we reach them if we don't want to go in person? David, will you please provide some information about your office schedule and how people can reach your office via email, via mail, hours? Do they have to make an appointment?
We're open from 8:30 to 4:30 every day, every weekday, and we are only 3 people, so we get to the people that come to the counter first. The emails are getting answered as quickly as we can. And we try to get to most of the phone calls. We don't get every single one, I know that, but I don't have any preference one way or the other, whether people email or call. We're just really busy right now, and we're doing the best we can.
And we are looking to hire that fourth
Right.
person here shortly. We have a plan for kind of social distancing to allow that to happen. And we did have a technical glitch also that was not allowing some of the calls to actually get to them. We did look into that when I got your email. We fixed that so that the calls were being patched properly. We did get another question from a resident.
Okay. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Well, let's go to Councilmember Javed. We don't want to miss anybody. Hasib, do you have a question?
I do, but if you want to address the resident, I could wait.
Okay, don't let us forget about you. Okay?
And this one's pretty quick, so I think we'll be able to go back. So it says, can a notice of the registration change? So I think they're changing the state law now that allows for Virginia plates to be issued. So can that be put in the water bill? They're asking. This would be a quick way to make sure folks are informed. So yeah, it's something we can do to kind of help get the word out.
Are they talking about the change at DMV that they're gonna, or are they talking about something different when
No,
they
we're
say
talking about the plates.
registration?
Yeah, so registering at the DMV
Okay.
for Virginia plates. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Hasib, go ahead.
Hey, good evening, guys. Yeah, my question was regards to the vehicles that are out of state and the commercial vehicles. I mean, some of these vehicles might be registered under a business or LLC, and then they might have another vehicle for private use. The business vehicles, there's no law against them having an out-of-state license plate and being parked in the city, is there?
I don't believe that. Debbie, I
That's a
don't believe
Dean
there is,
question.
Yeah, he's asking a legal question.
right? Okay,
That's a
but I
Dean.
thought we registered vehicles to the city that have out-of-state
Sure,
plates.
yeah,
Because they are businesses.
we have since 9/11.
So we believe you're right, that they're not required to if they're a business. Dean, I don't know if you wanna add to that or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood the question. He's saying that if it's a business that has an out-of-state tag, that they don't have to register in the city?
Right, their vehicle.
Well, so are they garaging it regularly in the city? Because I thought that, so the issue is whether or not they have to have a decal versus paying personal property tax. A decal just means they've registered with the city. They don't necessarily have to pay property taxes by doing so. So my understanding, Debbie, is that some businesses can have their vehicles in the city, and they have to actually register them with the city and pay property tax for the city. Others don't, but they still need to register them with you and have decals, right?
That's correct. And the commercial vehicles, the trucks, it depends on what weight it is. If it's over 10,000 pounds, it gets billed personal property where the vehicle is housed. So the ones that are under 10,000 pounds, we just sell a decal to. The others get a decal and a personal property bill.
Is that in state law?
Well,
Yes,
let me,
ma'am.
I guess reframe the question. Like say like a Toyota Camry is not designated as a commercial vehicle, but that Camry can be registered under an LLC. Like say if they're self-employed, they're contractors, or management, and their office is in Maryland, but they also use it as a private vehicle, as a private vehicle use. So I mean, you can still register residents.
Using it as a private vehicle, yeah, I understand. So you're saying that they're driving it home even though it's registered to a business in Maryland, right?
Right.
Okay, so if they're regularly garaging it in the city, and it's using the city's streets, they'll need to get a decal, but that's different than whether or not they pay property tax. So property tax is, since we're a non-prorating locality, it's based upon whether or not you're there on January 1st. And that's how we get, that's how we determine it. So it's not a simple answer, yes or no answer. They're required to register it if they're parking in the city. Whether or not they have to pay property tax is a different matter.
Okay.
Do you have a
Can
follow-up?
I have one more question, or are you doing another round?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
The other question was in regards to, I guess, code enforcement as a whole. I guess, we hear that the staff is understaffed and we only enforce it after a complaint is served. Do you think we should staff up that level and kind of be proactive and maybe enforce some of these code enforcements violate?
Yeah, well, we are enforcing, so I don't wanna make it sound like we're not enforcing, we are, but yes, we agree. If the community doesn't believe we're at the right enforcement level, we need to ramp up enforcement level, then we need to revisit those 2006 staffing levels and try to get closer to them if we wanna get back to that level of enforcement. And you can either do that through additional employees, or the question from the resident, we can evaluate private contractors as well.
But it's like anything else, Hasib, we only have so much revenue, and if we spend revenue on one thing, it will not be available for another. It's all about what
Yeah, absolutely.
priorities.
That's what we have to determine, how big of a priority is this for the
Yeah,
community.
exactly, yeah.
And you're right, because there's
Right,
registration,
I mean,
which is why it was
like,
cut.
the residents, I think the one that commented below that one person can't enforce the whole city, right? I mean, it's a good point, right? So, something to consider.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, it's an excellent point. We just, it's like we're swimming with one hand tied behind our backs, unfortunately.
To get another question.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so we received another question from a resident. So what's the status of the citizen-driven petition? Our block petition, the city for resident parking restrictions for our block, Colburn, between Holden Drive and Rugby Road. So it's not part of city code yet, so the status is this is one of the steps we're taking to evaluate it, is kind of the first, a presentation on what our options are, hearing from the community directly in this town hall format, doing the survey, but there's gonna have to be continual discussions with the governing body on what the best option going forward is. But there's nothing in code right now that would grant us the authority to act on that petition that was provided. And that would require the code amendment first to be able to accept that. But certainly, we hear the concerns, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this town hall.
Okay. Before we do another round of questions, I'd like to ask Debbie to elaborate on that 10,000 limit. Could you say that again? If it's over 10?
Vehicles that are registered in a business name. If it's a truck, if it's under 10,000 pounds, the state says they have to pay personal property where the business is located. If it's over 10,000 pounds, it gets billed personal property by the jurisdiction that it's actually housed in.
Okay.
And that is in state code.
Okay, so like an enormous construction truck over in the business district, if it's over 10.
Or even if it's in the residential district,
Okay,
we would bill that personal property tax.
so our city would collect that PPT.
As
Okay.
long as we know about it. And right now, we have 96 vehicles that are like that. I'm sure that there are more than that.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, do we have any more questions come in? Okay,
I
let's
had-
do another round. Donald?
I didn't have a question. It was something I kind of thought of while we've been discussing and and you're presenting and all of us are starting to talk, and was that maybe, because I'm the one that came up with the idea for the off-site parking, and and I appreciate you bringing that forward. Maybe kind of listening to the concerns of the residents, maybe one of the options could be is we could have an off-site lot for the commercial vehicles, because I think that the commercial vehicle issue seems to be a particular problem in residential areas. They're also very large, they block sight lines, they take up more than one parking space because they're usually longer, wider, just bigger vehicles. Maybe they're the ones that need to park at Costello or City Hall or wherever we decide it's a safe and appropriate place, but maybe getting some of those commercial vehicles out of the residential areas might be a more beneficial if we only have so much space to offer. That might be something we can offer some of the residents who have to bring vehicles home.
Is that worth adding to the analysis?
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
I mean, versus having people's individual vehicles parked, have people park these big trucks and these big commercial vehicles, because that would get them away from residences. You wouldn't have ladder racks where people may be injured. I mean, I live in an HOA. We actually, during the 2000s, we had to pass a rule in our HOA that they couldn't park the big trucks with the big ladder racks in our parking spaces, because we almost had a little girl hurt because she was riding her bike and almost hit one of the ladders that was hanging over the truck and over the sidewalk. Because we have perpendicular to the houses, so we have the vehicles and the ladder racks were over the sidewalks. So, I mean, maybe that's through the survey, maybe that's a better option than putting people's personal vehicles in an off-site, because it gets them away from.
The only thing
Maybe.
with that is sometimes people are driving it. We have 2 tow truck drivers. That's all they own is a tow truck. So how would they be able to? get off the street, park at City Hall or wherever,
Yeah.
they couldn't get back to their house, cause that is their only mode
Right.
of transportation.
Yeah, we are a hardworking community.
Absolutely. I was
Loads
just-
of hardworking people.
Absolutely. I was just thinking of maybe something that might be more beneficial to residents because you'd get more large vehicles off of some of these really narrow side streets, you know.
Do you
And
have a-
Debbie's point, that's why my preference was always visitor parking at these areas, because they're not parking there every day. So it's just a temporary inconvenience for your visitor that you have to go pick them up at the lot versus
Right.
requiring residents to park there. To Debbie's point, even when we discuss this with residents after governing body meetings who are concerned about this, they don't wanna park that far and have to, figure out a way to get back to their homes. But I think for visitors, that's a little bit more feasible. It's not a daily thing, for the visitors. It might be for certain, services, but again, we're talking about overnight, so I think it'd be very limited where that would be a nuisance. That's why when I brought it up here, it
Well,
was
yeah,
really the
that
visitor.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that to the discussion, maybe.
Do you have a question?
No, it was just more something I thought of while we were talking, and
Oh, Alana?
Yeah, a question from someone who contacted me. When someone fills out a on the website a code enforcement complaint, is there a follow-up back to the person who submitted it? That's a question.
It depends what you mean. So follow up, like you're saying, like the automatic kind
Will
of
someone
response that we
contact
receive.
them
Or
with
the
a
email?
follow-up?
Are you talking about
With
the
some sort of
This is Nikki. Yeah, we do. We always try to reach out to the person who sends the email acknowledging their complaint. A lot of times the person who is sending the email kind of leaves out some pertinent information. So for that reason alone, there is contact, but we do appreciate, we'll have their email certainly address, but we also appreciate a phone number because sometimes it's just easier to convey and get more information over a phone call.
Okay, good.
So yes, we do respond.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have another one? Okay. Councilmember Machado?
Yes, I got another question. I didn't ask, when is the new website going to be available, Laszlo?
Yeah, our
So
goal is.
the residents can do permits and all of that online?
Yeah, so that's a two-part answer because our goal is to have a website up and running by the end of this calendar year. But the build out, the full kind of adding all the available online documents and processes, that's gonna be probably drag out until I would say next summer. We are looking again and bringing kind of contracted support to help us implement these software implementations much quicker, but these are time consuming and you wanna do them right. So, the new website goal is to have it up by the end of the calendar year, but all of the advantageous components of that new website, besides kind of the user-friendly component from city staff, but for residents, all the different services that they'll be able to do, that might still take a few months after that, but our goal would be by, before the end of this fiscal year.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up?
how about the payment portal?
No, I don't, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Miriam. Councilmember Sendejas, do you have a question?
No more questions. Thank you.
Okay. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, Councilor Shoemaker asked about the payment portal. Chris, are you online?
I am.
Okay. Can you discuss the payment portal, kind of the timeline for what you envision for that one?
Yeah, right now they're all currently operating in concurrent schedules. So essentially all of the build out depends on other aspects of the build out. So the kind of sequence of events is you need the new website to kind of host and support the new payment portal because we wouldn't want to have everything up and running for the legacy version, which is our current version, and do kind of rework for the new version. So it'll depend upon when the new website's ready to go, then the payment portal will be the next execution, followed by the kind of piecemeal integration for those kind of community development specific components as well. So expect those to kind of roll out on a monthly basis, basically from the new website, like Laszlo has stated, by the end of the calendar year, going through the spring, summer, and fall. We'll advertise and market out those new capabilities as they become available, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Chris.
Councilmember Javed, do you have a question?
Yeah, yes, this is in regards to properties, abandoned properties or abandoned cars. Are we able to put like, I guess, if there's a code violation, like some type of a lien or a fine? I know there's some cities that have a vacant property fee that escalates every month. The property's vacant, or they apply liens on houses that cut grasses. Is that something we can do?
So if you're talking about on the right of way, on the actual public right of way, the police can actually issue kind of the 10-day notice before towing the vehicle. And if you're talking about on
typically it's the houses and the backyards, front yards,
Okay.
stuff like that, not vehicles.
Okay, Calvin, I don't know if you can make a comment on that one.
What was the specific question about abandoned vehicles?
No, I was more talking about houses and lots.
Oh, abandoned houses. Okay, yeah. When there is an abandoned house, yeah, an abandoned house, when it's vacant and unsecured, it's automatically considered unsafe. So we immediately can secure the premises from access. If the house is vacant or abandoned and doesn't show any necessary code violations that are visible for the outside, there's not much we can do.
Right, the ones with the code violations, can we issue, I guess, a fee?
So any violation of the property maintenance code, unless we were to create a schedule of civil penalties for property maintenance code violations, is by default a misdemeanor.
So just to add that we would have to kind of adopt an ordinance to identify the specific code violations and provide the amount. We are limited, I believe, for what we can charge and how many days, or how often we can charge for the violation. So, but with that is the collection, because that's another matter. Just because you issue tickets, some people do pay, but that would be another enforcement approach, or trying to have somebody kind of go after them for a collection of the fees. And I have to say, in personal experience, once people have gotten a ticket or received a ticket for zoning violations or these kind of code compliance issues, they believe they can just pay the fine and keep violating. So there's an educational component to that. But we can certainly do the civil penalty.
Is that something that we can
I
send to
always
tax?
figure they don't want to keep paying fees month after month. But I see your point too.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely an additional tool in the code enforcement toolbox.
If they
I'll ask.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that answer.
You're welcome.
Javed, do
And,
you have a follow-up?
yes, the second part of the answer was a question. I know we have limited parking spaces, but if we like say manage public parking, say like after 5 residents only, would that have to be required? Would they have to have a special permit?
No, that was one of the ideas that I discussed in PowerPoint. Because we already issued the decal, that would be the easiest way to do it. If you're garaging your vehicle in our city, right, you're required to get a decal. So if you have a decal, then overnight, if we require decal only, that's going to reduce a lot of the non-residents parking in
Well,
the
I'm
city.
not saying like some people from different part of the city can park over there and take up parking from a resident.
Yeah.
Nothing resident-specific managed parking.
If you're talking about neighborhood-specific permit, yes. If you go the neighborhood-specific permit, then that would, only those residents who live in that neighborhood would be allowed to park there overnight. It would require a new administrative process for our police to issue the permit stickers, either with visitor. It's just another administrative headache. And the fact is, if you're a resident who lives a street over, you can't find parking on your street, you're not allowed to park on that street even though you're paying the personal property tax. That doesn't seem fair to those residents. So that's why my recommendation has always been the decal, because you're paying the tax, personal property tax, you're registering with your vehicle with the city, you're paying the decal. That to me is a fair way to at least limit non-residential parking in our city.
And would you?
Well, I'm saying, do residents at, like, say, Palisades apartments, they have to get a decal?
Yeah, they do.
Or no?
Yep.
So I can't have a decal, I'm paying, I cannot park on their lot though.
Well, that's a gated community.
Yeah, no, you can't park in there. I mean, that's a private property. I mean, you have to.
Well, that's what I'm saying, so that premise is, like, you're saying that if anybody in the city could park wherever they want.
No, I didn't say wherever they want. I said on public right of way, because we actually use city tax money to build or to maintain that right of way. We don't use tax money to maintain the parking lots of Palisades. So the resident doesn't have a right to park there. We do use money for our public roads and our sidewalks, so people should have access to those, to have free access to them.
Right, but I mean, the people that live there, then that seems kind of unfair, I think.
I mean, that's, yeah, it could be. I mean, that could be your perception. If you live there, you should have rights to the section in front of your house, but that's not how it's currently structured.
That's contradictory to the concept of a public right of way.
Correct.
And I mean, who's
Do you
gonna?
have a follow-up, Hesse? Did that answer your question, or?
I mean, but who's gonna
Yeah, no, I got it. Thank you.
Who's gonna be at the Palisades though and park in Bloom's Crossing? I mean.
Did you have a question?
Well, I'm just to follow up what he was saying is, I mean, I don't know that we're gonna have somebody at the Palisades or at City Center is gonna go park at Bloom's Crossing because they think it's fun. Like, that's way out of the way. Like the
But they could have a kid or a parent that works over there, and maybe they want to go spend the night.
Well, no, I
Not
know.
the
I'm
decal, though.
right. No, I'm
Okay.
arguing against his point. Is
Oh,
that
okay.
that people at the Palisades are gonna park somewhere else in the city on a public street
No, I think
that's
what he was saying is that
and it's gonna tie up a spot
why
that
can't
that
a
person.
resident park in the Palisades parking lot?
Oh, I
Because
was.
in apartments you can't, because there's a different apartment decal that you get when you become a resident
Well,
there.
right.
But that again, that's not public right of way, so it's not really.
Right, but I think his concern is that people that live at like say an apartment complex are going to go park on a city street, and they could park at their own place, but now they're going to take up a spot in front of somebody's house somewhere else in the
But they
city.
can already do that.
Well, right, but I think that was his concern was that.
Download it, expressing my more accurately. I'm saying somebody from Palisades with a decal can park at the city right away and
Yeah.
take a parking spot from their residence.
Yeah, but they can already do
Cannot
that
be
right now.
twice.
But they can already do that right now. I mean, they get the same city decal.
And they're paying
But that's
taxes.
what I'm saying, if we restricted only like a couple of hours where that residence has only permission to park there, not the whole city.
Yeah, again, that goes against kind of the concept of it being a public use, like our parks available to all, and really even more. We're taking that extra restrictive of who's paying the tax for that specific right of way. It's our residents, so we're saying if they live a street over, why can't they actually park? If they can't find parking on their street, why can't they park on a neighboring street when they're paying the same tax? And again, I guess to Donald's point, I don't see, it's important to me, like, why you would want to park farther away when most apartments, you have plenty of parking in your actual parking lots. You wouldn't want to park far away.
Wasn't your point too at City Center they were technically overparked on the residential
Yeah,
side?
they're way overparked. I mean, you go to that, if you go out tonight, go to that back parking lot in front of the Connor House, and you're gonna see at least 75 to 100 vacant spaces not being utilized. So they're overparked at City Center. The Point at Park Station, no issues finding parking there at all. I can't speak to the Palisades, but at least from those two, there is no lack of parking.
The Palisades would seem to be okay because they're under a locked gate, so nobody can even drive in there unless you've got a code.
Hasib, did you have a follow-up?
No follow-up.
Okay. Vice Mayor Banks? Preston?
I don't see Preston on
I don't think he's on the
Okay,
here.
okay,
I don't know if
thank,
he's on.
I can't see that, so thank you. Did you have a tax question, TACS?
I just was my question to you, and I wanted to, so that you could say it to the public, was if they were fined for whatever reason and for code enforcement issues, like I think somebody was saying, I don't know if it was Miriam or somebody, if they don't pay, and I think maybe it was Mickey said it, can they be run through tax, TACS,
Yes.
for being delinquent, or is that only just for like real estate and personal property
No,
tax?
you can run other things through TACS. The biggest limiting factor is the software, right? The format that they need it in to get enforced. That's been the most significant delay. It's why we continue to do enhancements to be able to provide the file formats to TACS. So we started with the real estate, then we got to personal property, but there's other sources that we're slowly kind of building out to be able to handle.
So we have legal authority though that we can do it. It's just the more technical side of it that we don't have, but we legally could do it though.
And they're really close to finishing up with business license. So once I'm done with real estate, then I'm gonna work on business license, and Patty's gonna send it to TACS.
Oh, okay, good.
Any
Hey,
questions?
Laszlo,
Yes.
I just wanted to chime in with sort of a comment. The city can't just make people owe money for civil violations when we encounter property code violations. You know, we can implement a ticketing system, but it's ultimately always up to a judge to actually cause the money to be owed to the city. A ticketing system is a way of people prepaying to avoid court, but we can't actually just add money to people's amounts owed to the city because the city staff see a violation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So-
So we would actually have to go to the judge and get them to issue or confirm the actual fee is owed to the city.
So do they ratify it basically? Like they say, okay, this property owes $800 now because.
So is that with the ticketing system?
Yeah, to Calvin's point, I think it's similar to other tickets where you have your day in court, and then the judge makes a ruling on that. Once it gets to that point, for speeding tickets, the county, the court is the one who goes after. We don't get those receivables to send to TACS. We're completely dependent on the courts. Parking and civil, we could figure that out, but to Calvin's point, he's absolutely right, and I missed that. You have to get the judge to kind of order that fee needs to be paid. So that's another step, but again, when you're talking about all this with one code enforcement officer and one zoning administrator having to go to court, it's like each time a police officer has to go to court as well. That's a significant amount of staff time to do that as well.
Thank you for, Calvin, for the clarification.
We did get a couple additional questions from residents.
Great.
Okay, so Calvin, this one's for you. Residents asking for you to address 276 Mosby, kind of what the status is for that one and kind of what the next steps are. That's it.
That house was declared unsafe and unfit for human habitation. The owners signed the notice agreeing to repair or demolish the structure. When they failed to comply with that notice, the certificate of occupancy for the structure was revoked. The notice was sent that they had not complied with the order to repair or demolish, and that their choice was to demolish the home. Since that time, we've been approaching the issue that the building code nor the property maintenance code provide a clear path for the building official or the code official to just go in and demolish the structure. The code sections referenced in that last FAQ mention that it reverts to consultation with the city attorney, and then further evaluation for use of sections of 15.2 of the State Code Virginia to pursue action to repair or raise the structure. Either option requires a program be implemented to handle such structures, or a specific ordinance be passed to address the structure.
So we have to pass a specific resolution saying that we want that specific house to be demolished.
Did you hear that, Calvin?
That would be more a question for Dean. The code requires one section requires an ordinance, the other section requires a program.
What does a program mean in that context?
And I would have to defer to Dean. I'm assuming it means a program for dealing with the derelict properties in a spelled out fashion that we're willing to adhere to with every derelict property or every property declared unsafe, unfit by the code official.
Dean, are you there?
Yeah, we just need to establish some sort of a process so that you can't just arbitrarily decide you're going to do something. You have to have a set process in place. So I'm fairly confident that's what Calvin's talking about when he's citing that. I don't know it, I haven't reviewed it, so I know for sure. But I'm, just based upon the principle that due process, you have to have something in place. You can't just arbitrarily decide to tear down a house.
But the real issue, though, that I guess to get to the resident's point about kind of what's being done now, like that's kind of irrelevant even if we pursue that right now, because we just didn't have the money to even do the demolition. So we can order it to be demolished. We just didn't have the money. But in this year's CIP, we actually targeted when we'd want to pursue that process, which is why we haven't tackled that full analysis. Okay, how do we actually do this? Because we just didn't have the money to go ahead and even do that. But again, our treasurer is evaluating perhaps pursuing kind of the forced tax sale and see if someone can go in there and deal with it so we don't have to spend tax money on it.
Is there a tax delinquency on the property?
That, again, I would have to check with the treasurer,
Yes.
but from when I spoke, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
When I spoke to her a couple months ago about this, it was an option that she was evaluating.
Okay, so hypothetically, if it goes up for auction and it is sold to someone who says they're going to fix it up, is there something to compel them to fix it up, or can it just sit there?
I believe we would still have the same authority to still raise it if the conditions aren't brought back up to where they need to be, so it's actually,
So then
being able to occupy.
after it
So
goes
nothing
through
really
the,
changes.
okay, so it would go through the tax sale, the new owner has it, and then at that point, we would do eminent domain?
No, we don't have to. Hopefully the person buying it would buy it so that they could build it up, right? I don't think someone would just buy it and just have it condemned by the city and torn down by the city, right? So hopefully they would go in there and fix it up, but if they don't, it would be no change to us. We'd still have to go in there, use taxpayer money to demolish it. So the hope would be they go in there, they fix up the house themselves, and then we don't have to spend any tax money.
But if they procrastinate and if it looks as though
We
they're
gotta
not
keep
gonna
trying.
do
Yeah.
anything, then we
I
still
don't-
can go in and,
Absolutely.
okay.
I don't think, the house on Cabell that we sold, I went by it last weekend. It's basically down to the studs. You can see right through it. Like when people buy those kind of houses, they're gonna go up and back and front and side, and they're gonna resell, or they're expecting to invest and resell quickly because, they're.
So we have till FY22, hopefully we get the result before then, right? That's when we put it on the CIP, we can push it back if we want to, but I don't think our residents there wanna wait much longer than that. I think we gotta try it, like, if no one can resolve this, to help out our residents, the city's gonna have to go in there and deal with it ourselves, spend the money to demolish it, because it is a horrible nuisance.
Well, and the
for
safety issue of it all, we
Right.
have an obligation to do that.
Yeah. The next question is related to that. It's asking when a vacated abandoned house is demolished, could it be done by the fire department via controlled burn training exercises to save the city money in demolition? I don't believe so. I think there's specific demolition requirements because of the health issues associated with that home. Calvin, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, but I think the answer is no to that one.
I would defer to the fire marshal on questions of that, because there is always an inherent risk with type 5B wood frame structures with the fire getting out of hand and spreading.
They're probably
We
too
have very
close
small
together.
lots here in the city, very narrow lots, and the houses are only separated at times by 10 to 15 feet.
Yeah. And Chief Soper, I saw you were on. Are you still on? I don't know if you have an answer. If not, we can just follow up with the resident afterwards. Okay. we can move on.
Okay. I'm back home in Pennsylvania, they would have controlled burns, but like you
Yeah.
say, they're very close together here.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm just thinking from a breathing standpoint, everything in that
Yeah.
home and burning it.
Yeah.
The last time people were in there, they were in hazmat suits.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
why I just
Yeah.
Wow.
it's a good.
Oh.
Yeah.
But
You
I
probably have to
saw that
cover
somebody was mowing the grass there, you know, as a project to be kind to neighbors, but I would think that that might be an issue. What if they fell and got hurt or something?
Yeah. Don't know what's on that property.
Yeah.
Yeah, even on the yard, that's right. No more questions. Does anyone, any member of the governing body have another question?
I have a question.
Yes, Miriam.
This is for Debbie. Debbie, do you still publish the DMV schedule? So I got questions that this resident has issue because the car didn't pass emissions, so they need to go to DMV. So they have an extension, you know, several requests like that. Do you have a schedule for DMV? When are they coming over?
They told us that until the governor allows them to come back, that they can't. They were hoping it was gonna be September, but then they said no. So we got our fingers crossed for October.
Miriam, he's gonna call me tomorrow and let me know whether they can come in October. So I'll let everyone know when I find out.
They would use the police
Okay,
station
great.
again, or?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, yeah, so they likely use the police station again, Miriam, if they come back.
Oh, DMV.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
but it is an issue right now, getting DMV appointments and dealing with a lot of the issues, so we are hearing that across the city.
Any questions? Anyone? Okay.
Yeah, I got one.
Sure.
I guess it's in regards to the house on Mosby. Can we just, are we able to go to, I guess, the courthouse and obtain an order of possession? If that's a dean question, I'm not sure. Or through, I guess, a receivership?
I'm not familiar with that process. I'd have to know exactly what you're talking about and research it.
I mean, if it's gonna go for tax
Okay.
sale.
Yeah, I guess I
We
could
could
email
get
you
some money out of it maybe.
information on it.
Is this something you've seen done by other localities of Virginia?
Yeah, down in Norfolk, I know it's been done down there.
Okay.
I could find out some more information and forward it to you.
Yeah, if you would, please. And if-
Sure.
I know we said we would continue until 10 o'clock, is that correct?
I don't know if we'll put a cap on it.
Or is it
Usually just
appropriate?
do it
Past
for
my
7 to 10.
bedtime.
Okay, so,
It-
yeah.
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
10 o'clock would be a cap.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
But we haven't received any further questions.
okay. Would it be appropriate to stop ahead of time, or should we wait it out? Well,
Just to
What
put
do you
my
think?
2 cents in, my
Yes.
husband texted me and said it's sleeting outside.
sleeping?
That's a
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
since we're
So
reading it out.
if nobody has any questions for
Next
me, I'm leaving.
steps, I guess,
It's past my bedtime.
Oh, next steps for the parking. So
If
So
they
can you
do
bring
have a
back up
question,
slide 12?
somebody write
I
it
think
down
we've
and
answered a
tell
lot
me
of,
tomorrow.
I think we've answered a lot of questions tonight, which is good. I think the public got a full. Bye, Debbie.
Oh, no, back.
I think a lot of questions got answered tonight.
So this is kind of the key. Oh, actually, I'll wait for it to pop. Okay, let me wait for it to show up on YouTube. There we go. Okay, so these are kind of the things that we need to evaluate. I need directions from you all. We're gonna bring up some options for how to do that here soon. Options 2, that's kind of your all's guidance to me in terms of the budgeting process for how big of a priority is this? Do we need to expand that capacity? That's kind of the next step, but that's more of a budget conversation, so probably during that time, that's when we'd want to discuss that. The key ones, 3, 4, and 5, that's again a discussion that we can continue to have work sessions, just kind of chat about kind of pros and cons. There's not much more I can really add to that conversation, but we can still workshop that one a little bit more and see which direction we want to go with that. And when we decide that direction, then we're just going to have to amend the code and also implement the street signage when we go ahead and do that. So it's not going to be an overnight thing, but I think that conversation can be had anytime over the next few weeks, about 3, 4, and 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, that probably should occur with 10. So if you all want to do a full code analysis, I mean, I think we probably should end up doing at least the number 7. We probably should have always had that as our code.
Absolutely.
But if we want to do kind of the comprehensive code analysis and do all the kind of one legislation to clean this up, that would be a discussion where you would essentially give us the authority to go out and pursue companies that would do this for us. Public education is an ongoing thing. The new website will help us to better do that.
Do you have any idea how much that would cost, number 10?
I don't. No, we would have to. So we have to kind of say, hey, go out and pursue this option. Bring us options back for doing number 10 and therefore doing 6 through 9. And then number 12, that's literally it's because of Calvin's department just being so overwhelmed with all the phases 3, 4, 2 stuff that I've thrown at them. They just don't have the bandwidth. They're doing all these reviews of rezoning, site plan, everything for those. So that's just been lagging. So if we have maybe the person doing number 10 actually craft that for us, then as part of the kind of the code amendments, and again, just do one legislation, that's probably the recommended route. So kind of immediate things that can happen is you all saying, hey, go out and bring us options for number 10, and let's schedule a work session to continue discussing items 3, 4, and 5, and during the budget season, let's discuss options 1 and 2.
Number 10 is almost a budget question too.
It is, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I do.
And I think we all need time to digest all of this information and perhaps email Laszlo our thoughts.
Yeah, I guess it's just in my mind, number 7 is just low-hanging fruit that we should do.
Yeah, we can certainly go ahead and just
Because I will tell you, there's the house, I think it's 135 Manassas Drive. It's like 2 houses on one lot. I don't know what they're doing, because they literally knocked it down to the cement slab and started again. And it's about 4 to 5 times bigger than what the original house was. They have a 1-car garage, and the driveway is maybe 1 vehicle or 2, but the house is probably 4,000 square feet at least. Yeah. And I keep looking at it and I'm thinking, how many vehicles are they going to have at that house? Like a 1-car garage is just not going to do it, with the number of off-street parking, because I'm in Manassas Drive, so there's not a lot of spots, and so.
They can't even park behind the house.
Right, because they're landlocked, because
Yeah.
it's on the Scott side, yes. You can't access it from the behind either. I think at a minimum, that and at a minimum of that is to have at least 2 or maybe 3 required spots off street, whether that's garage plus driveway, depending on the square footage, maybe there's a break at
Or-
2,000 square feet or
I think-
something.
Dean, would the number of spots be linked to the size of the increase of the house? Would it be linked to the square footage that's being added?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, we have.
You would treat it. You'd
So-
want to treat it basically like a new zoning coming in. You know what you would expect there.
Right, so we
Do an
can't,
analysis that way. So I don't know what the number is, but it should be based upon the number of square feet of livable space.
right, so we can't just go ahead and say 2 spaces or 3
Yeah,
spaces. It
no.
has to be linked to something. It has to make sense.
Well, I mean, almost every new.
Right now, we don't really have a parking requirement for single-family homes that doesn't make sense. I mean, I think we ought to do an analysis for, anywhere in the city. So if you come in and say we had some estate homes being built, we ought to have a certain requirement based upon that versus townhomes. I mean, we have it based upon just general size for townhomes and such, but not for the size of the single-family detached, which I think is what we need. And that should be based upon the size of the livable space.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
So we would start with just bringing the code forward, just to deal with the additions right away. And we want to do more comprehensive,
Right.
we can do
Right.
that, but that would be the
Yeah.
first step. And
I think.
if you look at the backup slides, it talks
Right,
a bit more
and I'm
about
sorry I
that.
didn't get a chance to read all of it, but yeah, I mean, I think that's low-hanging fruit would be that, because, with that, you're adding a lot more vehicles to that property.
I'm not sure what the cons are beyond just kind of the perception of property rights, like, that's my property, I should be able to do.
I mean,
as I please, but you're creating a burden on your neighbors.
Right, I mean, a total demolition should have a minimum of a two-car garage. I mean, any single-family house you buy now has a 2-car garage in this area. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to see something new that didn't have at least a 2-car garage with it. So, I mean, that's where I got that from is, most people have an expectation
So I just
for new
want to be
development.
clear, we can't dictate like garages, but we can dictate the number of spaces provided. So, and under our current ordinance, the garage space only counts as half a space, because people use the garages for storage more so than parking. But under zoning, we can't dictate what type of use or require them to absolutely have a garage. But if they are going to build a garage that's only half a space counted, so if you could fit 2 cars in there, then it would only count as 1 space. I just wanted to be clear about that.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay.
I guess, I mean, my thought is with the decals, we're kind of, I think we're going to have more discussion, but I'd like to see less limits. I don't want to see what they did in Manassas, where they have permanent parking starting at 8 o'clock. You effectively have nobody can come to your house in the evening because you have to buy the visitor parking there, and they're $2 a piece, and you're only allowed to buy 50 a household per year. I never want to see us do that in Manassas Park. I think it was implemented terribly, and I have friends who live in Manassas who complain about it because it's so restrictive that, if they have guests over, they have to park on the street so their guests can park on the driveway, because otherwise they're not allowed to be there past 8 o'clock. So I would not want to see a program similar to that in our city.
What would you do with the visitors?
Well, I mean, you could, I think the issue was with the overnight parking, so, you could do it midnight.
Okay,
I mean,
so
most.
you're talking about hours, not.
Well, I mean, most people, if I'm coming to visit you,
Yeah.
I'm likely to have left by midnight, so I wouldn't want to see something like that where the parking starts at 8 p.m. or 5 p.m. in some places. I think that if we've paid personal property and I have a decal on my car, I should be able to park on a street in Manassas Park. And that's just me, and that's my opinion, is that I should be able to go and park on Southwit, and I should be able to go park on Brandon, and I should be able to park on Manassas Drive.
That's number 3.
Right, I'm not, and I don't also want the administrative headache for the police department. We're already short-staffed, And that just adds a whole nother, because they would have to be open 24 hours a day then. Because if you're going to enforce it 24 hours a day, you'd have to have people that I came to your house and it's 1 a.m. and I'm your guest and I don't have a permit now. But at 2 a.m., the police come and ticket me. So I'd have to be able to go at 1 a.m. to the police department and actually have somebody there that can issue me a visitor parking permit.
Yeah.
I mean, under some variations of that. So that's just some of my concerns with the kind of, I know there are residents, they want a hard permit parking. They want a hard number 3, and I understand, particularly the people on Alt Colburn, because they're tired of the county people coming over there and parking on the streets and driving back. I completely understand that, but we have to have a
resolve that too. I mean, the county people wouldn't have the decal.
well, right. I mean, right. That's why I am arguing for that. But I would like to see it so that I could go to Alana's house and park on the street, because I have a decal. There would be no restrictions for me, or I could go to Jeanette's house or your apartments. It doesn't matter. But I'm just saying is that if I have a decal per paid personal property tax, I should be able to park on the street at any time. That's where I'm at.
Any more no questions? Okay.
I think we lost viewers to the presidential debate.
Yeah.
Or the sleep, is it still sleeping? Did Debbie go in?
Yeah.
She did.
She have
We had somebody on the YouTube feed actually said to us that we did a great job of getting into the details.
Excellent.
We got a compliment.
Excellent.
It's hard for us to get a compliment on
Well,
parking.
I mean, I love details, but I know that not everyone does.
We good to go?
Yeah, I think we're good to go. Okay. For the folks at home, we're going to wrap it up now. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed, abstained, motion carries, we're adjourned.